platforms, the Nudge Foundation's YouTube page, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook page, as well as Quinn's YouTube channel. If you have any questions, you can also put down in the panel, in the question answer tab at the bottom of your player. We have another interesting panel discussion coming up. There's a power panel that is waiting to discuss the role of institutions in development. The panel consists of people who have built great institutions and have been an inspiration to a lot, including me. The moderator for the session is Gaurav Gupta. Gaurav founded and heads Dalberg in Asia, an advisory firm focused on helping clients optimize for social impact. His work ranges from advising key global development institutions to working with grassroots organizations on core delivery and scale challenges. His prior career involved being a serial social entrepreneur, a climate activist, and a strategy consultant. Welcome, Gaurav, and over to you.
Thanks, Pooja, and welcome everyone. I've got a pleasurable task of introducing you to our panelists and moderating this session. Pooja, I just want to do one quick sound check since we didn't get a chance. Is this all coming through clearly? I'll take that as a yes.
Hear you.
Yes,
we can hear you, Gaurav.
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Right. Look, we have a very, I think, interesting but a heavy topic, this idea of the role of institutions in development. So I'll just set this up and then introduce our panelists. The criticality of development institutions for our progress and prosperity is, I think, very well understood. But this Indian Independence Day, it's an especially timely discussion because of a confluence of trends. Even prior to the current pandemic, voices for more radical institutional reform have been growing. At the conceptual level, we're seeing a breakdown between the institution of democratic governance and the institution of capitalism, these things that seem to have often gone so happily together. Our institutions of collective governance at the global level are failing in terms of shared objectives around sustainability and spreading prosperity. And at the same time, there are demands for more secular and for more non-secular institutions. Technology and social trends are shifting power between public and private institutions without actually seriously consulting the zeitgeist. Think about data and how quickly those things are forming, where how much are citizens even being asked about what it is that they want as their future data governance. And adding to this powder keg is a pandemic that has led to a dramatic pause, which at best has led to a reflection, but also has led to clearer understanding of the limitations of current institutional structures, and actually I think a strong desire for change. So let's acknowledge that we're modestly holding this conversation at a time where there is clear demand for rethinking existing architecture. And so we have a great set of panelists to have that discussion. We will be holding this discussion at both the macro and micro level. There are macro institutions that represent our consensus and our norms, but these themselves are supported and often influenced by the leading bricks and mortar institutions that form what really is the tactile experience that we as citizens have. After all, you can have an institution of global governance that is enshrined in national sovereignty, but it is strengthened or weakened by the performance of the individual organizations underneath it, such as the various UN bodies. Right? So we're fortunate today to have a remarkable panel that has operated both at the micro level, building or advising on how to create leading institutions, but are also able to rise above the parapet and reflect on really what's the macro institutional ecosystem. So let me do this alphabetically. We have Arun Maira, who with his 25 years of the Tatas and subsequently as chairman of BCG India and also the Planning Commission of India, has also been with the Planning Commission of India, has closely observed, advised, and written about India's institutions. Most recent of his books are Transforming Systems, Why the World Needs a New Ethical Toolkit, and Listening for Well-Being, Conversations with People Not Like Us. Now, I don't think you should judge a book by its cover, but I'm very prepared to judge a book by its title, and those sound like damn interesting titles. So thanks, Arun, for joining us. We have Pramit Sinha, who is the founding dean of the Indian School of Business, a school that was ranked in the FT's top 20 of B schools within 6 years of welcoming its first batch just in 2001. He's also the founder and trustee of Ashoka University, a world-class liberal arts college, and then a whole string of things beyond that, which will take up too much time. But I do want to mention that his first love, as I found out, was actually learning and higher education. So he did a PhD in robotics from the University of Pennsylvania. So he was doing machine learning back in the 80s before it became as much in vogue as it is today. And then finally, we have Rupa Purushottanam, she's chief economist and head of policy advocacy at the Tata Group. She's a co-author of the book Bridgetal Nations, Solving Technology's People Problem, and also a co-author of the path-breaking, and I think we'll all remember this one, the 2003 Goldman Sachs report, Dreaming with Bricks. So someone who truly can see what some of the big trends that are going to shape us for the next 20 years, she was able to call that back in 2003. But aside from all of her publications and her work with the Tatas, one thing that would be really interesting to hear from Rupa is herself building a fantastic institution as the founder, one of the founders of Apsara Leadership Institute, and we'll hear a little bit about that as well. So great to have you guys. Thank you for joining us. And maybe, Rupa, I'm going to kick it off with you with a bit of a tough and unfair question to put onto your shoulders. But help us set the scene a little bit. We're here to talk about the role of institutions in development. And the Tatas have been great institutional builders. So in the institutional architecture of India, as you see it today, what are you seeing as missing institutions? And what are institutions crying out for reform? Help us sort of warm up into this pretty heavy topic.
That's not quite of a warm up. That's a doozy of a question, Gaurav. So, I mean, it's so broad, and we have plenty of missing institutions to talk about. But I just want to first start by saying that, you know, I don't want to fall into this trap. If I just even think about this past week, you and I have had some conversations, and I just think of the number of institutions that have come up in conversation to solve problems. I can think of 10. We've talked about institutions that have to do with skilling, ag tech, community colleges, municipal services delivery. So I feel like we fall into a trap where we think that there is an institutional fix for every development problem out there. I do think there are missing institutions, right? And so when you ask me a question like that, I guess for me, I will always come at it from the perspective of thinking, you know, what are the big trends that are happening over the next decade? And what are the institutions that we need to build for it, right? And so if you think about it, sort of solving back from that, I would say like one would be around elderly care, thinking about how we're going to support the elderly, maybe looking at, you know, some of the difficulties in other countries right now in terms of the elderly care systems that they've set up and the weaknesses. The other big one that I would highlight, and it goes off the last conversation, is on gender, right? I think for India right now, if we could really institutionally think of, you know, an ambitious way to address the care economy for everybody, that to me should be one of our top 3 priorities as a nation. And I think it can unlock so much, right, from economy onwards. So, I mean, and we can keep, I think, you know, we can bring up lots of things that we see on a daily basis, but I just want to make the point that we shouldn't be too quick to just dismiss all of these institutions that we have built at great pains either, right? And are, you know, many that are very well designed. And I think we also should think about how we make them stronger. And some of that has to do with strengthening and making sure institutions can deal with issues of today. But for me, the biggest thing by far is that, you know, I've been working physically in India for almost 15 years now. And I feel like we have great institutions, but we just don't have the connective fibers between them. And if we're ever going to talk about scale, it seems like we're searching for the one institution that we scale up and it's going to solve everything. But really what's going to address scale is that we do have that connective fiber. And I just think that India suffers a lot in my experience. We suffer from silos. So I would say that would be, to me, figuring out the institution that understands to connect all of these would probably be sort of a big force multiplier.
Right. And let me just sort of connect that to a question I wanted to ask Pramit, because I mean, one of the things you highlighted is actually the need for connective tissue. But Pramit, I would argue you've been a little bit more of a maverick in terms of, you know, in 2001 when ISB came on, it was trying to do something quite different from the existing malaise. And I think your institutions subsequently have also tried to do something different. Are you, talk us through that and why you've continued, I mean, what is the secret to some of that success? Because you've consistently had that. And what's the overall theory of change? Is it about building more connective tissue, or are you trying to be more of a lighthouse to say, here's what's possible and help shift the mindset? Take us into your thinking around your institutions.
Thank you. You made my day. Nobody's called me a maverick so far, so I'll take a snippet out of your recording. Thank you. No, thank you for having me. It's great to be on this panel. I think you picked up on this well. Personally, I've taken a more of a lighthouse approach, and you could argue that this is a bit of a cop-out approach. People often tell me that, I should get more involved in broader policy making, or, some of the connective ness that Rupa is talking about. But at some point, I just felt like it was easier to build an institution and do that and drive change that way. And I think you need all these different initiatives, right, to make change happen ultimately. But in our case, or at least in my case, I've been stuck in this model of saying, how can we create more and more institutions that show the way? And the one big thing that has been behind the institutions, and I have to say that I'm no expert on institution building, other than that I've been involved in the setting up some of higher education institutions, is that in all of these institutions, you need, for institutions to do what they are supposed to do, whether it's elder care or whether it's higher education or any other field. The best institutions in the world are not owned by anyone. They are truly independent. Nobody owns these institutions, yet everyone who's involved in these institutions thinks they own them, right? So the level of commitment and the level of involvement of the people involved in those institutions, either in the building or running of those institutions, is extremely high. Yet, from the broader stakeholder perspective, these are truly independent of any ownership, any particular individual or institution, or even the government, or a private organization. And so what we have tried to do at the heart of an ISB or an Ashoka or other institutions that I've been involved in is to try and replicate that in the context of something new that you're setting up. Because in India and in a lot of these, you're setting up new institutions. And that's essentially at odds, because there are going to be a few people who will be involved in setting up an institution in the early days. It's almost like a startup, right? And so you have the founders who are very vested and who would like to control it and who would like it done their way. But the contradiction in that approach is that if you really wanted the institution to outlive you, then you've got to let go. And so how you manage that process is really at the heart of building these lighthouse institutions. And I can talk more about that, but I'll kind of stop there to say that the governance of these is really at the heart of ensuring that they are successful and achieve their objectives and purpose.
And maybe it'd be great to get a practical example of that. You talked about governance being at the heart of this. What's an example of a governance structure that allows these institutions to be sustainable in the way that you're describing?
So very quickly, and not to take up too much time, I mean, if you look at the best universities in the world, nobody owns them. So if you look at pick any top university of your choice, who owns them? You don't know who owns a Harvard or a Stanford or a Cambridge or an Oxford. Now, how do you replicate that at an ISB? When you have 2 or 3 people who are actually putting in the money, this is philanthropic, not for profit, but some people are putting in a lot of money to make these things viable, and could equally say that, hey, we have a lot of say in how this institution should be built. And so what we have done both at ISB and Ashoka is to say, listen, regardless of how much you contribute, you will only have one single vote. So effectively, all donors have the same decision-making authority or power, if you want to call it, which then diffuses the ownership in terms of decision rights. If you look at the contribution, there may be 2 or 3 donors who've actually given 10, 15, 20x of the smallest donor. But you compensate for that in other ways. You name a building after them. You create a center in their father's name. You create some chairs, and you compensate them for that. And this is the very traditional Western model, which we've replicated. But what you also do is use that model to say, regardless of what you give, you only have that one vote. And so everybody gets equal say. Now, suddenly what you've done is diffuse this tension that I was talking about earlier. Now, of course, some people will choose not to participate because they will want to have 4 board seats because they are giving 4 times more than somebody else. And we've actually had to tell people, no, we will not allow that. And people have walked away, and we've lost the opportunity to raise valuable and precious funding because of that. But setting that expectation and those ground rules from day one has helped us a lot over time.
And what you raise is part of a larger tension, which I know, Arun, you've been talking about when you sort of thought about at the big institutional levels in terms of our norms, right? There's a breakdown in consensus around this, right? Which is you want inclusion, you want almost representation. And at the same time, we have a property rights structure which says, whoever is the investor should get the ownership, right? And people are now seeing that this is breaking down, that even our global institutions have a level of colonialism still part of them because they're owned by the people that had that money at the beginning. Can you say a little bit more about what those tensions are and what you think will emerge out of this? What is a new consensus that's forming? Because I thought this was a really great micro version of that, which is, even the board level of an institution. What do you think is happening at a broader level? Is this breaking down, this idea of who invests gets to own? Arun, you're on mute at the moment. It has to happen once, don't worry.
It helps me to clear my throat again. Thank you. Yes, at the heart of the problem of governance, has been pointed out by Pramad, that we've got 2 conflicting principles that apply to the governance of institutions. One of them is a much more longer standing principle, which has gone on for centuries, that those who own a property have a right to determine how that property will be used. And therefore, even in democracies like England, it was landowners who first had the right to vote, and those who didn't own had no rights to vote. And so it went on, and people got disqualified if they became paupers, for example, then you no longer had a right to vote. So the principle that unless you own it, you have no say in how it is to be used by society. Much more recently, though, and the principle of democratic rights, that means those who do not own anything perhaps, but are citizens, have a right, an equal right to vote, is still not a settled idea. We have this as a theoretical principle, but even the United States, where it's coming to this whole thing about Black Lives Matter, how recent is it that in the United States, sort of the beacon of democracy, Black people were given equal rights to vote? Okay, so this is a most recent principle, and these 2 principles have been clashing in civilization. And the principle of property rights is the principle by which business runs. So when you talk about free markets and business institutions having a larger say because they create wealth, the wealth creating institutions, they would be constantly protecting the rights of their shareholders, the people who own. Whereas on the other side, we are saying, no, the people who own nothing should have a say in how society is governed. Now, this we come down to, therefore, we have to redesign, I'm saying. Pramad said very well how the redesign of an educational institution could be done on the principle of, well, you all have equal rights, whether you put any money in it or not, or put little or more. I'm saying in business institutions also, the people who work in the institution, who give their whole life, and they may not put any money in it, should have as much say, perhaps more say, than some remote investor who maybe owns the whole institution in terms of a property right. So this is where the human right, the beating hearts that work, must have more say perhaps, or equal say at least, than someone who owns. Now this idea is where we come down to the reform of business institutions, which is picking up. When you talk about social enterprises, and people are saying that a social enterprise is one that produces social good. One of it is, yes, it doesn't damage the environment, hopefully, like a pure business institution which just exploits the environment to convert it into money, wealth, or digital wealth for people. The second, more importantly, is a social enterprise enables the people in it who work in it to increase their own wealth. And how is this done? That they own the institution. So any profit that is produced is not passed away to someone who began by saying it is mine and I will determine A, how it is done, and B, whatever profit is surplus produced, it comes back to me, and I can choose then to grow this particular institution or do this fancy word now, I exit. And the faster venture capitalists exit, the better they think they are at their business. You know, how long? Don't take too long, and exit with a large valuation as soon as you can. So we have been dominated too much in the last 20, 30 years, particularly with the thoughts about venture funds. And just to simplify and make our argument interesting, we try to run our societies like venture investors would be running our societies. Go back to it. You know, the people who are on the ground in the villages, working in their own fields, working in their own small enterprises, they must be the owners of all the assets that they are using in the production, or at least if they don't own them, they must have the right to determine what is done with those assets to make them more productive. So this redesign of business institutions to run by the principles that Pramath is saying is the 21st century challenge for civilization, because the idea of running societies as free markets and money flowing around the world has gone, if I might say, a bit too far. We've come to the point where migrant capital has far greater rights, enormous rights, legal rights, than migrant labor has. Migrant labor doesn't have opportunities or legal rights when it moves, unlike migrant capital. It can go in and out wherever it wants to, and migrant capital is allowed to sue elected governments, take them to courts and arbitration to say, it was unfair that you taxed us or changed the rules of taxation on us. You can't do this. But the people there said, we need your money, and you have been using us to produce your profits, and we need it now to improve ourselves. So I'm sounding ideological, but I'm not. I'm talking about the design, the architecture of decision-making and what it's associated with in the world today.
Not at all. I think the amazing resonance right now in terms of, and it's a beautifully put to say, you know, migrant capital has more rights than migrant labor. And I think it's visceral because we've seen it on the streets actually play out. So Arun, you brought a very strong inclusion lens. And I think there are two things I'd love to explore with all of you around on the inclusion lens. One is, in a way, you've talked about institutions for the poor rarely are by the poor. And that creates dissonance. But I think something else, which at least I observe, is that the institutions of the poor, or for the poor, I should say, not of the poor, for the poor, have very low expectations. They suffer from a interest. Target setting is about trying to get to the average. If you look at education, it's like, how do I get a whole mass of people to an average, even though the average is constantly moving? And so I want to throw this question to Rupa, and I want to bring in some of that ground level experience you have in trying to build a leadership institute for young girls that is really trying to offer what is a very elite education relative to what is actually normally available when we talk about doing education for girls. So I want to hear your thoughts around this thinking of actually going from what usually our education efforts are about, which is let's, large scale, help people get to the average, where you've taken the tack of let me actually build serious leadership and send girls to some of the best universities in the world. Why did you do it? Talk us through that experience.
So yeah, I can, let me talk you through that. But when you're talking about low expectations, it just reminded me of this. I just want to tell you this one story about Asura. So, we had a donor doing a due diligence review, I would say maybe 2 years ago. And, so we were prepping ourselves for it, and someone came to interview all the stakeholders. And she went to talk to our parents, and she came back to tell us what the feedback was from our parents. And, we have a great parent network, but we were a little bit nervous because we have no textbooks. Our students run parent-teacher conferences. We have a leadership curriculum. So we do a lot of stuff that, has challenged and stretched people's expectations of what education should be. So we were bracing for all of this. And then she came back and she said that the feedback that she got by and large is that parents said, at Upsara, I feel respected, and teachers and administration are kind to us. And that's not what we ever experienced in our previous schools. And so if, that doesn't set the bar for low expectations, I don't really know what does. So anyway, I just wanted to explain that. I think from the ground up, we have really low expectations. And then I think from a policy level, we have these gold standard, very high expectations of what we think we can achieve. And then when it's so difficult to achieve those, from survey design, everything that we do in our lives, we have these, things that are very hard to reach. And then we have no middle ground. And then it's kind of like, you just drop. But to the question about lighthouses, I think, to me, it just comes down to the fact that aspiration comes from exposure, right? And I think you need to have lighthouses to show the art of the possible, and not in a conceptual way, right? We talk about lots of examples of what happens in other countries, but when you can show something aspirational happening in the specific context you're in, and that raises expectations for what something like education should look like, I think that will move us further down the line. So that's why I think, it's not, we suffer from always saying it has to be either or, but we need, in that whole, we need a little bit of all of it working together to move us forward.
Yeah, I think it's remarkable that if you look at surveys in India, you'll see that the trust in government institutions is actually remarkably high within citizens. If you ask citizens, what do they expect government to do for you? It's remarkably low. So we have high trust of low things happening for us, which is partly drives the institutional incentives as well. And I guess I'd open this question up, but certainly, Brahma, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts as well on what are the kind of institutions that you see are actually raising expectations, actually demanding more, and all of you have had such great experiences. I mean, what are you seeing out there that are actually making us think about a higher quality outcome rather than everything being about the lowest common denominator at an institutional level?
So I'll have to think a little bit about this, which is probably why we have this topic for discussion. But maybe this is just a recency bias, but I think that a lot of what the government has done recently with the national education policy is a big step in the direction of quality. I think our focus there was a lot of rhetoric around quality in the past, but at least what was happening on the ground was a big push towards access, and at the expense of good quality. You could argue that we've actually diluted some of our existing institutions and allowed quality to decline in our push for access, at least in education, both higher and that has led to the kind of reaction that you talked about, that there's a lot of trust, but in education, that trust has also gone. More and more people, we have the highest number of kids going into private education, both at the school and the college level across the world, happening in India. But back to your point, I think the current push to completely reform education, to set up new institutions like the reform of the UGC and the AICTE, the setting up of the National Research Foundation, very much like the National Science Foundation, the setting up a National Technology Forum, and the recognition that technology has to be brought in to deliver high quality education to the furthest student. and so on, are actually very, very strong steps in the right direction. Now, I do want to say that I do understand that this is just a stated intent, and it's a policy document, and it'll have to be translated into reality. And I'm sure Arun can talk about some of the frustrations of translating that into reality based on his experience at the Niti Aayog. But I think that, and as I said, it's very recent in my mind, so I can't help but mention it, that I think that's a big push, that if we can at least make some of it even happen, it will be a big change. I'm personally trying to take the tack of pulling a bunch of people together, including people in government, to understand that without the help of technology, we will not be able to deliver quality at scale in our country. And I think that's a big theme that a number of people do get. And I'll stop in a minute to only say that, the scale of all our social problems, the size and the scale, forget, of course, there's complexity and so on, is something that we have never seen in the history of the human race. And it's just a reality given our numbers, whether you take anything that we take on. And I'm convinced that while we'll continue to build traditional institutions and use traditional models to address our challenges, unless we use technology as almost a key lever to make change at a scale happen, different from the way people are using technology in the rest of the world, we will not be able to address the scale challenge that we have. So I think that's another aspect of it that I would like to emphasize, and stop there.
Arun, I think you were coming in.
Yes, Gaurav. I mean, these questions are leading me to say, look, what we are saying, as Pranath just said, he said, unless we change something fundamentally, we won't be able to address these very complex challenges which not just India's facing, the whole world is facing. But then he slipped in, unless we use technology. And I was reminded when I started consulting 89, 90 in the United States, that's where technology had started to go, and Michael Hammer and the whole thing were re-engineering the corporation. And the lesson learned was, just by putting in technology, you're not going to improve things. You've got to redesign the process. And we've come to a time now in the world, we've got to redesign the architecture of institutions. And let me be very concrete. When I was invited to join the Planning Commission in 2009, the challenge given was that the way India is going about planning and trying to implement change in very complex matters, all sorts of matters, everything is not working. And people demanded that abandon the Planning Commission and create an implementation commission. Don't make another plan, just implement all the fine plans that you have made. And like, it'll apply to the NEP now. Don't. How are we going to implement this? So we got down to it, but we did it in a practical way. We asked people in various sectors of industry that we've got to grow manufacturing and industry in India to create jobs. You people, I mean, most of them private sector, but along with the people in government who allocated those responsibilities and international experts in those industries, make a plan for India, for your industry, say what you can do as private enterprise and what you would require in terms of support from the government, infrastructure support or whatever support is required from the government, and say how much you'll be able to stretch the growth of your sector in India and how many more jobs would you create. These two outcomes we want to see. And we had consulting companies galore wanting to work with me to say, we want to get into this action to understand how India works and to contribute to it. So McKinsey's and BCG's and Bain's and KPMG's, each of them allocated one of these industries. But objective was to understand from all of them, why was it that India, in spite of having plans, and we've had plans for these industries previously, can't get it done. So we had a steering group, which were great people from industry and from academia, listening into each of these working groups. And there were 26 of them. And they were required to present periodically questions that they'd come across and answers to previous questions. And so we were learning about the system and why it doesn't work. And we came down to finally this, that what is preventing India from realizing the objectives of all the plans it makes or policies that it announces is, yes, implementation. And why is there no implementation or insufficient? There's too much confusion, and Rupa pointed that out, too many silos and lack of coordination. So then we said, this is a famous saying of the lady, as you know, who did the best for system thinking, Donella Meadows, who said every system is perfectly designed to produce the results it's presently producing. So if the present Indian systems, the results it's producing is confusion and lack of coordination, what is it about the design, the architecture of our institutions that is causing this to happen? And very clearly, let me give you an illustration. Skilling was realized by everybody that basic thing is skilling. Unless you have more skilled people, industry will not be able to be productive, won't give them jobs, etc., etc. So what did we do? We created a central skilling ministry. Okay, but the central skilling ministry can only look at on a large scale everywhere, standardize and produce skills. But the people need jobs. So you need a central industry ministry, and there was one. They need to coordinate. The skills must match industry, and the timing of growth of industry must match the pace at which skills are coming. Then you say, but there's an education ministry in between. So education is a big problem. So we must have one central ministry and one commission. This is the way we think. And we great management consultants help clients to think like this. Focus, create a dedicated group, put the best people into it. It's not just business. Government runs like this too. This is a universal way of thinking of how to organize. Get focused. And if there are 10 problems, you'll have 10 ministries. If you've got 17 problems that the world is facing, we'll have 17 goals in the SDGs. Each of them will have their experts and their teams and ministries from their respective governments. And there's more confusion because you go to then coordinate amongst all these experts, and they understand each of them are part of the system only. And if they move too fast with their solution because they are better endowed and better supported, like skill ministry was for a while, you end up with the backfiring of your solution that you produce more skilled people who spent their time and money and then say, but there are no jobs. And they get mad with you as a government. So we don't trust you. So trust in institutions breaks down because of the architecture. And you see, we have been doing it like smart management people. If there's a problem, get focused and do it, right? Now, in the NGO world, in the civil society world, I've noticed the same, okay? That look, I take this cause, but there's another aggravation that is caused that I so passionately care about it, and I'm doing it like for free almost. So I'm investing myself with my ego in it. And then you have another NGO working on the same territory. And they say, but I'm doing it better. So when I was in the planning commission, we said, okay, we've got these social problems. We want to hear from the NGOs, their solutions. So we said, okay, there's women's problems, child problems, Dalit problems. In each of them, there were 20, 30 very eminent NGOs, some local, many foreign funded, and here said, you collectively tell us what is the solution. They told me, Arun Maira, are you living in some fool's paradise? Do you expect, great women who are greatly admired for the work they do to listen to each other and tell you an agreement what's the solution for the women of India? We have our brands, we have our solutions. You got to listen to each of us separately and figure it out. I said, I don't understand the subject. You say you understand it. Please listen to each other. And for the sake of the women of India, you come to one solution. But see, this is the ego problem coming in between. The first one was maybe you might say is a science and scientific and expertise problem. So we architect solutions and institutions which then create these problems of coordination and confusion, which we then say come in the way of implementation. So how do you solve this? This has to be solved by getting coordination at the local level, at the smallest level, because that is where all the different forces combine in their unique ways. The problem of women in Kerala are not the same as the problem of women in Bihar. And the condition of the environment, physical environment in Kerala is also different compared to Bihar. And so you go, the quality of the infrastructure is different. These different forces, all three of which need to be improved, combine in their particular ways in every locality. And so we need local system solutions collaboratively designed and implemented for these big global systemic problems that we have. This is a very fundamental shift. We will always, as experts, kick it upstairs and say, we need another big commission, more budget to that ministry, and then it gets solved. It will not, because each of our problem, whether health or education or enterprises, is interlinked. And we're noticing this in COVID. We've got the doctors telling us what the solution is to prevent the virus, physical separation. And now the people who have to run supply chain say, but that's, messing up people being able to earn, they're dying of hunger. So please, can't we coordinate?
Yeah, in fact, I want to dive a little bit into that, because COVID has been an example where it's very clear that the more localized an autonomy we can give, and there's plenty of studies now to show that people have created much more ground level solutions and allowed governance to sit at a local level, have performed much better. And so actually, I want to bring that back to a point Rupa made earlier around the fact that it's not about necessarily new institutions, it's also about the fabric between them and the links between them. Actually, did we just lose Rupa? Don't know. I think we might. I was just about to throw a question.
Yes, we have lost her, Gaurav, I think.
Okay, well, I'll bring this question back to her, but then I guess the question, I'll bring it back to you, Pramath, which is about, you raised the point of technology, and if you actually, one thing which I thought that the point that Arun made was that it needs to be local. Now, often in the past, the idea was a lot of synergies and so forth exist by having that top-down view. But today, because of technology, you can run much more networked organizations. That means someone who's running at the ground level can still have all of the knowledge or access to the knowledge that someone very far away has. Do you think that because of technology, we can actually just run fundamentally new systems of governance and architecture for these institutions? Can they be much more decentralized, as opposed to the traditional pyramid models of peak bodies and then middleware and then people on the ground?
Yeah. Listen, I'm no expert on this, but I'll tell you what my current experience suggests. I don't think you have to take technology all the way to the ground, but what technology allows you to do today is what Arun is talking about, where you allow the end user to control what they receive and customize it to their needs in Kerala or Bihar, right? And I think that's the powerful notion. But to do that, I go back to what Arun also said, that you have to design things from a clean sheet. You can't be looking to fix existing problems or to supplement and technologically just enable what is going on today. I think if you really want to use technology to your advantage, then you have to think from the ground up, in what models can I now deploy, which will solve things at scale, which will take care of some of the silos that we were discussing, and which will allow people at the ground level to customize. Now, again, this is sounding very conceptual and philosophical, but let me give you a simple example from the world of education. Now, the truth is that there are at least half a dozen examples around the world already, and this is going to happen in India, trust me, where the last student gets to learn from the best faculty or experience the best possible course on a particular subject. In the past, that was by definition not possible, because if you wanted to get high quality education, you had to go to an elite institution, right? And the education was by definition, high quality education was by definition elitist. But today, you can take the very best of the faculty, and through the medium that we are using right now, or even through recorded asynchronous courses, as they are called, take it to the last student. Of course, I know that many people would be jumping up and down in the current problems and saying, listen, people don't have access and so on. And I agree, and I think that will get solved for over time. If you put that issue aside, so now you have to completely rethink the way you deliver education. You can't just be saying, okay, I'm in Ashoka University and I'm going to now start educating. I mean, of course you'll do that, and that's a no-brainer. But if you now have access to technology which allows the last student to consume education at their own behest, right? In their own control, as and when they want it. Then you have to completely redesign the system and think of what possibilities they will exist to educate, the government claims by 2035 that we would have 80 million students in education. The only way you're going to reach them is through this model. So what is the new model with which you teach 80 million students and you get every student the best course on mathematics 101 that you could get in the world?
But Pramod, your vision does seem to suggest a greater level of equality. But I
Yes.
guess one argument would be, if the governance is not as equal, will the outcomes ever be? And what I mean by that is, if fundamentally institutions remain governed by elites, as opposed to institutions of the poor by the poor, right?
Right.
Whether it's collectives and so forth, because doesn't the average keep moving? Sure, new technology is coming in, but that just means rich kids are just using that new technology at an even more advanced way. And then the gap continues. How can we institutionally create an architecture that is fundamentally, and this is one of the questions I think audiences are asking as well, that is also driving equality as a piece of architecture? Because are those incentives there?
Okay, so I'm challenged in answering the question, because I don't know if I'll give a politically incorrect answer here. But I don't think it is about bringing the people who most need it into the governance and the setting up of institutions. Of course, you wouldn't exclude them. But I do think that you need to bring people who are elite by, whatever definition, who also have their heart in the right place, right? I think there's a lot to be said about experience of setting up large institutions, doing things at scale. And I think you need both. I think you need a combination of these things. I think you need the best people in the world to be working on the toughest problems. And by best, it doesn't necessarily have to mean the best educated. I take the example of an organization that I've been involved with, Pradhan, right? Pradhan was set up by Deep Joshi and Vijay Mahajan almost 40 years ago. I say, or you take Seva. These are all like institutions that I have a lot of respect for, and they've had amazing impact on the ground. And if you look at it, their model is a mixed model in this, at least the way I see it. They may not characterize it that way, where their whole model has been that, hey, let's bring in the best minds and get them to come in and devote their life. And in their case, that's what people have done. These are very well-educated people, qualified people, and dedicated to the cause. But at the same time, their model involves people on the ground, right? So, and they are setting up institutions on the ground under the larger umbrella of a Pradhan or Seva, where they are empowering local self-help groups and women in those self-help groups to build federations and institutions for collective enterprise and so on. So I think it doesn't have to be one or the other. And that's all I'm asking.
No, and again, to push you, and I'm going to actually throw this to Rupa, because, as someone who's trying to build an institution that's trying to create leaders from low-income backgrounds, right? I'm not suggesting that you take in people who are necessarily not qualified. But I think the big part of the debate going on right now across the globe is about inclusion from a representation perspective. How do our boards, for example, start to have people who have, in fact, come from very low-income backgrounds and have made something of themselves, right?
Absolutely.
And maybe, Rupa, that's something you can just talk a little bit about. And I think before you dropped off, I was going to ask you also, and I also know this is really close to your heart also from a gender perspective, but I also wanted to talk to you a bit about COVID and what are the schisms that the current pandemic thrown open about what's working in our institutions and what's really not.
Okay, I have so much to say right now. I don't even know where to start. I think on this whole question about technology, I don't think we have enough time, but Gaurav, I spent 2 years working on this book, and it was all about solving technology's people problem. The whole point was that technology is about how we design it. And if we're not solving for the problem that people have rather than the problems that technology has, we're going to keep running into this. And so I won't go into it, but I think there are very real answers for how to do this without just inventing a stack, right? Stacks are not going to solve development for India. But if you look at things like health and you combine that with, having ASHA workers being able to be technologically augmented with tablets. You have connectivity between subcenters and tertiary care, and you really focus on primary care as being the strength, the thing that needs to be strengthened. We can do a lot with healthcare, and technology augments that, but it's part of thinking about, not solving health, but solving care coordination. Okay, so but I'll leave that aside. COVID or leaders, COVID, you and I both have been writing a lot about COVID and its impacts. I think, to me, there are like 4 big buckets, if I can go quickly, when you talk about sort of institutional fissures or breakdowns. And if you go back to the beginning, I think, one of them has to do with the coordination and so on, but 3 are really institutional gaps. So the first is that we've seen, a ton about coordination between center, state, and local in terms of the health response itself. So, this isn't coming from me, but all the interviews that we've been doing with medical professionals and so on, the confusion that has arisen. And you know what, no one expected COVID. India's complexity is far more, you can't compare it to Taiwan. All that being said, I still think that the lack of coordination has exacted a huge price in terms of how local response can be tailored, and that's coming from all the interviews that we've done on the ground. I think the second big one has to do with data and data protection, and I think we usually think about data privacy as individual and state, or maybe individual and big tech, but COVID brings up this whole thing that now we're sharing our health information with our employers, with our retail stores, when we're going to a sports event. And so I think this whole question of how does that get handled brings up an institutional gap. The third one is informal labor, right? And by definition, our informal workers, which is close to 80% of our workforce, don't have an institutional backbone to support them. And we've seen all the problems with trying to get direct payments to the people that need them most, and also to try to target employment and reskilling opportunities. And the fourth is gender, right? So we've seen these outsized impacts of COVID, both in terms of care burden for women, as well as disproportionate employment impacts, not just in India, around the world. And again, I think, and the last session was talking about domestic violence as well. So there's lots of things that are impacting women. Where do they go? So I would just, there's many more, but I would say those are 4. On leadership, last, really quickly, if I can just say, this is exactly the point of why we started Avsara. I think I've seen it throughout my life, right? There are institutions that try to be inclusive, and, a lot of times that means representation. And you might have people from underrepresented communities, women, join a board, join a task force, whatever it might be. On one hand, you're asking people to join an institutional culture, a language, a set of norms, without having anywhere near the same level of training and just level of being equipped as other people. But the second thing I think is even more pernicious, which is, when this happens, the organization and the institution itself has to be ready for the change that it's bringing on. It also needs to understand the norms and the language that people are coming to them with, and be prepared to change. And I think that, I've seen it, and I still see it today. There's a lot of representation, but is there real need for change in our institutions themselves doing the work on these issues? I would say there's a long way to go.
And I know, Arun, you wanted to come in on this. I do want to ask you one specific question as you come in, which is, as someone who also operates at the global level and thinking about what could the new institutional architectures be, is there anything particularly Indian that's coming out from India, from India's experience on building institutions that are trying to be more inclusive, that we can learn from, that is maybe potentially influencing future architecture of governance?
Yes. Pranath had said something about education, and the best in the world should be available to everybody. The best teacher should be available to, in any subject, in each subject, to everybody. He had also said in the earlier discussions we had, Pranath, and I was really struck when you said the real solution to education for children is good teachers. The teacher is the person who brings together many things. The experience of the child is able to understand the pace at which the child is getting or not getting. And so all these things which are being fed in, world-class inputs, delivered, have to be combined together in that system called the child, in a system called the classroom. So it's the, if you will, the efficacy of that little system that will determine whether all the children there are developing, in spite of world-class inputs or not. And so this comes back to the design of governance. We found that until communities themselves take charge and say, this is our understanding of what is going on here and what we need and what the gaps are, and these are the things that we need from elsewhere. So in other words, we have determined the type of house we want to live in, and we know whether we want a chair or a table and what type of chair or table. If some specialists in chairs are telling everybody, you all use the same chairs, and telling someone else, you all use the same tables, but my house conditions are different, we'll have a, if I can use a Hindi word, a complete khichdi in those places. So it has to be the local people asking people about that, if you're so good at this, this is what I want and that I don't want. So don't thrust it on me merely because with your goodwill and good heart, you're giving me world-class inputs, okay? So examples from India, this thought that locally communities, if they take charge of themselves and we respect that they can do so, they will create goodness for themselves and thus the whole country can get transformed. This is Mahatma Gandhi's idea, let's call it. It's not just his, but he kept saying so. Local communities, respect the women there, respect the men there, respect the Dalits there. They will have to work out their business solutions and also their own local governance solutions and support them, help them build that capability. Now this thought that unless property is owned by somebody, it will not be taken care of is this tragedy of the commons of Hardin. And poor Hardin, he said so, but he kept till he died saying, I've been misunderstood. It was a little experiment I did in which the conditions, I mean, the controlled experiment, it was true. But in real life, where there are many other forces, this does not hold. Now the world is saying, my goodness, we need to learn how to manage the commons. And we realize that unless the commons are managed locally by the people who understand their own commons, we cannot manage the global commons. So Elena Ostrom, the first woman to get the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2009, after 60 men had got it already, was a woman who got a Nobel Prize for Economics in managing the commons. It was not fancy global economics. It was just people using their own resources and getting efficiency and equity while using the resources. And more than half of her research was in India. And it's very strange then. And I'm saying when she came to visit us in the Planning Commission to speak, there were only 2 members of a 11 or 9 member Planning Commission who showed up to hear her. Because the rest said, I mean, this is some woman talking about some Jola stuff. You know, let's hear when Stiglitz comes or someone comes, we'll hear real economics. I mean, Stiglitz, of course, is different. And so this is...
We just have about 20, 30 seconds just before...
Coming to India is the source of the best ideas and the experiences. Let's respect it. And our idea was this: India has the solutions for itself if you apply the right architecture of institutions which are local, empowering communities to think systemically and to collaborate with each other upwards. Thank you.
Brilliant. And let me bring it right back down to a practical level, because I think you've summed that up very well. I'd love a lightning round from each of you, just in 5 words, or 10 words. What is, if we gave you a magic wand and said you could build one leading institution in the country, what would it be? Pramit, why don't we start with you?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that. The magic wand is?
If you could build one leading institution in the country, you've built some already, but if you could build one more, what would it be?
To provide the highest quality of education to the last student using the online medium.
Wonderful. Rupa?
So I don't know if I can still say adolescent girls, since we have Apsara and leadership and education, but I guess, as I said at the beginning, I think India really needs to focus on the care economy and getting more women into paid work. And I think there could be a role for an institution in that.
Aaron?
I think a local governance institution, whether in a city or a town or a village, that must be a world-class institution. And we must have a zillion of these or a million of these. So this whole idea of scale again, a good idea applied everywhere by people who know how to run the idea, that's the institutional idea. And therefore, a very local institution, world-class, but a million of them operating all over India. That is what we need.
Wonderful. So in my, I want to yield the floor back because we have some great panel coming up, but I just wanted to say, look, the theme really feels like from property rights to democratic rights, from global to local, right? Those are two, I think, important trends that came out. It was thank you so much for covering what is a very vast topic and doing it so heroically. Thank you to all of you, and thanks for everyone who joined. Back to you, Pooja.
Thanks a lot, Gaurav. That was a really interesting discussion, and thanks a lot for actually bringing out the role of institutions in addressing the developmental gaps and different sides to institutions working in collaboration with each other. Definitely a major takeaway for me was the role of institutions on raising expectations at the very least, and snippets on the fundamental reforms through technology, systems design, and so on. Thank you once again, all the panelists, and thanks, Gaurav, for leading such an enthusiastic discussion. Thanks. Now, moving on, we are moving on to another interesting session. We have with us an entrepreneur turned investor who is not only known for being a successful businessman, but and a venture capitalist, but also his views on technology and investment, Mr. Vinod Khosla, founder of Khosla Ventures. He will take us through his journey of giving in the session, which is called Philanthropy for a Sustainable World. We also have Mr. Robert Rawson, director at Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, driving this fireside chat. Rob is the director of philanthropic partnerships. In his role, Robert leads a team that oversees the foundation's relationship with philanthropists and charitable organizations across the globe. Previously, Rawson also served as the director of Foundation's executive office and various roles in communication. Over to you, Rob.
Great. Thank you so much. Good evening, and I'm delighted to be here with all of you and with Vinod. So I look forward to this conversation, and we'll make sure to get participation from the audience of Vinod, but has really done so many extraordinary things as a founder at Sun Microsystems, and then as a venture capitalist and technologist, most recently with Khosla Ventures, but also, you know, a real driver of innovation and thinking on a number of issues that are critical to society. So want to make sure we're able to elicit as much from him as possible. So I'll keep the introduction brief and turn it over to Vinod, and maybe just to start, COVID-19 has certainly touched every part of the world and all of us in some way. So let me begin by welcoming you and just asking how you and your family are doing through this extraordinary situation.
Robert, and hello, everybody. It's great to have everybody here. Me and my family are doing great. It makes us realize how lucky we are to be able to quarantine ourselves, even hide away. And it actually really has highlighted the role of inequality for me and the level of fragility we have in the world. So some good to come out of it. It's dramatically increased my sensitivity to those issues of inequality and unequal access to all the facilities, as well as the fragility of the world.
Yeah, building on that a bit, you've worn, you know, many different hats in your professional experience as a company founder and leader, as an investor, as a philanthropist, and just, you know, as we get into this question of inequality, and we'll talk a bit about inclusive development, you know, I'd love to hear where you see some similarities in terms of how you might approach any particular issue with the different perspectives that you've had, you know, in terms of business leader, investor, and philanthropist? Are they the same, or are there differences in how you might think about driving meaningful change?
So there are similarities, and there are differences. I think fundamentally in philanthropy, we have to start with what to care about. And empathy for the less advantaged, I like to say the bottom half of the people on the planet, is one of the most important factors. Having said that, deciding what to work on is much more of a business decision. It's really efficacy and efficiency in whatever you decide to work on. So empathy plays a large role in what to work on or to care. Efficacy and efficiency, which are very business-like terms, play a large role in how to do it and how to even pick what item to work on. There's also related issues like how do you measure the effect you're having? Just working in an area is probably not good enough if you're not making a big difference. So there's sort of a trade-off and very much a business hat on this issue of which of these 6 issues should we work on today? Should we work on the short term versus long term? And how do you know you're being effective? But the cause you pick is driven by the heart, but even in that, which of the things that tugs at your heart should you work on? Because there are always too many.
Yeah, and in thinking about that, you know, and as somebody who's born and raised in India, living in the United States after college and for most of your life, but really being, you know, intertwined between both worlds, are there areas that you think are particularly important in terms of for philanthropy? And I'd love to hear if you notice any difference between India and the United States as you think about that context.
Well, when you look at the US, I think our level of resources is far, far higher than in India. But there are still the same issues. There's structural issues, which are always longer term issues. And inequality is the one that's surfaced the most in the current context. But it's a long-term issue. There's no short-term solutions that we can do over the next 3 months for that. And then there's very short-term issues, and the organizations like the Red Cross and all, after a hurricane or a landslide or a fire, is very good at addressing. I personally tended to focus on the structural, longer-term issues versus the symptomatic issues. The consequences of a fire are most felt by people who don't have resources, and that's the underlying structural issue. The symptomatic issue is there was a fire and people are homeless. You need to address both. You have to address both, but I do think my personal preference is for the structural, longer-term issues. So I've always had a tendency towards the long-term solutions, not the short-term solutions. I do say the short-term, and COVID is a great example, adds urgency and adds more awareness and empathy for the situation. You know, one of my hopes from the COVID crisis is we both recognize new issues and some of the underlying issues, and we add new scientific tools to go address other crises, to measure crises and to address crises. So,
yeah, maybe pulling on that thread a little bit, as we confront the rapidly evolving landscape in terms of the impact of COVID, you have approached pretty much every problem, at least as a firm, aware, from an approach of systems change and thinking about longer term and the role that technology and innovation can play, across a number of different needs for society. When we have a crisis like this, it tends to present, some extraordinary challenges, but with that, opportunities that really do cry out for innovative solutions, whether it's accelerating, something that people have been thinking about significantly, or causing us to adapt in a very different way. And you've written about this topic. I'm curious if there are areas that you've seen that excite you and give you a sense of optimism in terms of how, whether it is for sort of the most immediate response to COVID, but even building past the response and into recovery and resiliency, and really beyond that in terms of challenges that the world faced pre-COVID and will face hopefully, when we, not too long, when we're out of this immediate situation. What gives you a sense of hope or optimism, or at least motivation, in terms of where innovation might be able to drive some lasting change?
So I'm 65. After I turned 60, I decided I'd spend the next 25 years of my life working on a singular large issue, health permitting. Of course, health is one thing one can never plan on. But being today relatively healthy, I focus on the problem of 700 million people on the planet have a very rich lifestyle. It's rich in energy, it's rich in housing, it's rich in education, it's rich in access to healthcare, to entertainment, all kinds, transportation, we drive good cars, all kinds of services. 7 billion people want it. And given my focus on sustainability for the last 20 years, I always wondered how you do that. And for the next 25 years of my life, I decided to work on this problem of multiplying accessibility of services by 10x, while reducing, in absolute terms, the amount of resources needed to provide it. Steel, teachers, doctors, cement, you name it. Almost all parts of the GDP are focused on some need that us humans have, and 7 billion people want it at a decent, acceptable level. And how do you do that? In my personal view, and this is pre-COVID, was the only way to do it is multiply resources with technology. Could you make a building with 1/5 amount of material and make the space twice as efficient? Most buildings are empty most of the time, if you think about it. So that was pre-COVID. Now, what COVID has done is very interesting. First, it's proven how much we assume about what we can and cannot do. And I often say, we as people are limited not by what we can do, but by what we think we can do. We thought vaccine development took 10 years, and now it might be 10 months. We thought medicine took a face-to-face visit with a doctor. Now we generally acknowledge it doesn't need to. So certain areas have been highlighted by COVID, pharmaceutical development. I think all of healthcare will be dramatically accepted. I wrote a document about 6 years ago saying the only way to make medicine higher quality is to make it 10x cheaper. And that means much more accessible. So it was 10 years ago, I first wrote about why the world should really have AI doctors and AI tutors. Somebody mentioned education in the last panel. It is the only way every child can have personalized education and it be affordable. It is the only way. It's the only way every mother in every village in India can have 24/7 access to primary care. When a child needs care at 3 a.m., I can rush to the Stanford emergency room and don't care about the cost. That's not an option for most people. So I think certain areas, healthcare, education, are things that have been highlighted. We've gained certain tools. We've realized how much more we can do remotely. And so that may impact transportation. So I'm very, very excited that at least in a few narrow domains, the world has accelerated adoption of the assumptions around education and healthcare and pharmaceutical development and a few related things. That's very optimistic for me. I think that will survive COVID, and we will learn how to find antibody treatments to any infection within months, not decades. For example, we will learn how to do AI-based medicine at almost no cost for everybody who has a cell phone. So I am very, very optimistic about what technology can do structurally. And I've always believed that, but I think in certain areas we will accelerate this. About 3 years ago, I wrote a large document, it's about 50 pages, on reinventing societal infrastructure with technology. I'd say about 3 of the 10 areas are deeply accelerated now, and that's a real advantage we should gain from the crisis, the unfortunate crisis we are in today.
It's always helpful to have some optimism, but to see some tangible examples.
Can I add one more thought?
Yeah, please.
You know, so we've known for decades that pandemics are possible. In fact, in the late 90s, in the venture capital business I was involved, we actually started a venture fund focused on pandemics in the late 90s at Kleiner Perkins when I was there. But nobody paid attention. Now there's another large looming crisis that differentially affects the bottom 3 billion people on the planet, and that's climate change. And I hope we get smart enough to learn it is as important, maybe a much larger crisis, and that we need to address it, and that's not one we can address in months. So we have to have the technology development focus now to solve something that will affect a lot of people and frankly, dramatically affect the people with the least resources. Sorry.
Yeah, no, actually, it's the direction I wanted to go, and in building on that, you know, there's so many things that have been, I guess, a wake-up call for the world. You know, you were working on this 20 years ago in terms of pandemics. I work at the Gates Foundation, and you've probably seen, you know, Bill and his approach, Bill Gates and his approach to this, you know, particularly the TED Talk that he gave a few years ago, warning of this. And, you know, these are extraordinary challenges, but I think it's fair to say across the board we could have been better prepared and still respond better. And so, in addition to the technology, innovation, and adaptation, what else do you think would help us so that, you know, we as a society, and we can put this in a global context, in a US or in an India context, but what around society needs to evolve so that we collectively are better prepared to meet challenges like this and pull together versus get pulled apart in different directions?
Well, the global challenge is very hard. We are seeing this in the tension between Russia and the US and China, and frankly, it's unfortunate with our administration There's a natural tendency to try and bully our way out of things, which is very unfortunate with the current administration. So that is unfortunate. I think it starts with empathy, and it starts with recognizing that we are interdependent. It doesn't matter what we do. If we have people traveling, we are susceptible to pandemics everywhere that start everywhere. So it's not just other people's problem, every problem spreads. It's also shown, and that's true whether we are in the US or in India or any Africa, you pick your location. The fundamental structural problem that it has surfaced for me is the problem of inequality. And inequality and divisions in any way. And whenever we have them, somebody, likely a politician, will exploit them to create further divisions among us. You know, I think inequality, of course, is a huge problem in India, but even the religious divisions, somehow people think a Muslim mother with the 3-year-old child is different than a Hindu mother with a 3-year-old child. And that division will be exploited by people over time in their self-interest. So we have to remove all ideas of inequality or division. And we've seen this happen in the Mideast. The Sunnis and Muslims used to live happily together for centuries, and then people chose to divide them, and now it's a battle, and it's a permanent problem. There was never an issue for a long time. So I do think at the heart of it, we have to go after first these artificial divisions. And that starts when children are very young. And we can't solve that problem when somebody is 55. We have to solve it when they're 5 years old with what they see, what they learn, how they are taught about this notion of divisions and inequality. And frankly, I think people with the most empathy tend to be the happiest people. They care. And that's something we can teach people on very early. So I hope we teach very early to the very young caring and equality and the need for different points of view. And the point of view could be religious or liberal or democratic or Republican or pick your favorite.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's fascinating. So really the combination of empathy on an individual level and innovation on a societal level, if you can combine those, you know, there's strong reason for optimism going forward.
Yeah, I do think that there's a funny thing. I think empathy is key to caring and philanthropy. But to be efficacious, I recommend people read a book called Against Empathy on why what you do and how you do it, you can't use empathy. You have to use your rational business sense. So I recommend anybody interested in empathy, read this book called Against Empathy. Because then you can have make the most difference for the people you care about the most.
No, that's great. Obviously, it's a complex endeavor in terms of driving change for society. Maybe one last question from me, and then we'll see if we can take some from the audience. You and Nero joined the Giving Pledge in 2011, and I just welcome any comments on the experience in terms of being part of the pledge, working with other philanthropists, and I guess, you know, sort of a very open-ended question, but what do you think it takes to get others to recognize the incredible impact that they can have by using their resources, you know, financial resources, their ideas, their voice to drive meaningful change?
Well, so You know, the Giving Pledge is interesting, and I'm really, really appreciative of Bill and Melinda and Warren Buffett. When they first approached me, it was a very small group. There was maybe a dozen people we had dinner with here in Silicon Valley. And I had always thought of philanthropy I could do later, or worry about later, or think about later. And what the Giving Pledge catalyzed is worrying about it now and thinking about it now. The regular Giving Pledge meetings we have do two things for me. One, they bring it to the fore every year, and I have to sit down, and for the next month or two, it's frontline in my brain, as opposed to one of the things of the 20 things I have to think about. So it is very valuable to be part of it. The surprising thing is I think it really changes the value system of the family. What I would say to everybody who'd consider giving, it actually improves both happiness and value systems and teaches your kids and family how to think about things very differently than what's in it for me, what's the right business decision, how can I make more money. So that's very, very useful and frankly, pretty selfish. You'll feel better participating in philanthropy and really better caring about other people and things that are wrong in the world. The other thing that's very valuable here is to realize how many different things that we hadn't even thought about as problems are there to work on. I still remember early on meeting a couple that was working on child trade. And I never thought of that as a scale problem. And then I realized how large a problem it was by talking to them and learning from them. So there's a real learning opportunity of the number of things that need addressing.
So I'm looking through some of the chat of the questions that came in, and we're approaching the end of our time. So I'm gonna take just one or two here. You know, one was it's combining a couple questions in some way, which is, you know, sort of thinking about your role as a venture capitalist and also as an investor and a philanthropist. And sort of broadly, I think the sense of it was, given the challenges that society has, does capitalism still work? Do we need to evolve beyond it? Where do you stand on sort of the larger question?
Well, capitalism is efficient, and it's good at making whatever you decide to work on efficient when capitalism can address it. Capitalism is not good at picking the right goals for society. The most obvious example is the whole goal of every capitalist marketeer is to sell you stuff you don't need, to get you to click on links, to take advertising, to want things you never knew you wanted. And that capital was good in production efficiency 100 years ago. Capitalism is not as good at demand generation when it focuses on demand generation, not meeting demands. So I do think we need modified capitalism. I do think we need the efficiency of capitalism, but much more importantly, the goals of capitalism have to be much more focused on inequality. And I think inequality, whether it's between Hindus and Muslims in India or certain ethnic races in the US, it's becoming one of the largest social problems the world will face the next 2 decades. It's the one that I think is the most dangerous problem to have because it can be explosive. It's tinder for the wrong people to exploit. So I do think we need a different kind of capitalism. I do think we need to modify it in many ways. And I'd add one more last point. as we move to more sophisticated technologies, say AI physicians, or we've seen this with all the big tech companies, and with AI generally, it will increase inequality. About 5 years ago, I wrote a long piece in Forbes on how AI will cause GDP growth. It will cause productivity growth, all the traditional metrics economists use for the health of an economy. It will improve all those dramatically. And the title said, and rising inequality. That cannot happen because democracy, the world we love, is by permission of, capitalism is by permission of democracy. And democracy and democratic process can revoke capitalistic rights. And the world will lose a tool. But we have to keep in mind, capitalism is a tool, not an end goal. And so I hope we realize this and start to modify capitalism with other goals, not just production efficiency. And inequality is probably the highest goal we ought to go after with, I'll say, modifications to capitalism. I could talk about that for hours.
Yeah, no, it's excellent. Unfortunately, I'm getting the ping that we're at time. I first off, just thank you for the two of us in the U.S. What an inspiring way to get a morning kicked off, and for those joining in India, hopefully a really insightful portion of their evening. Let me turn it back to Pooja to wrap us up.
Thanks a lot, both of you, for sharing your takes on what philanthropy looks like on ground in times of crisis, particularly in the COVID pandemic. Your optimistic views, especially on human potential to tackle challenges, and suggestions to improve struggling situations as well. I think that was quite encouraging. So thank you, Mr. Khosla and Mr. Rossin, for joining us in an engaging discussion. Moving on.
Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thanks a lot, sir. Moving on, so we've heard a lot about some of the most pressing issues influencing development. So how about now we take some time to appreciate the two things that people and development are heavily relying upon worldwide right now. Hope you've guessed it right. Yes, the next session is about advancing science and technology for development. And to enlighten us on the same, we have Professor K. Vijayaraghavan, Principal Scientific Advisor and former Director of the National Center for Biological Sciences. And to facilitate the fireside chat, we have with us Nivriti Rai, Country Head, Intel India and Vice President, Data Platforms Group. Her other notable work include championing the use of AI and machine learning to enhance road safety in the country through agreements with state governments and collaborating with the Consulate General of Israel to drive innovation and connect startups from both the nations. Thank you for joining us, both of you. Over to you, Nivriti.
Thank you very much, Pooja, for this very generous and very elaborate introduction. I view myself as a simple technologist working very hard for India through Intel. So my honor to introduce to you the Principal Scientific Advisor. His accomplishments, if I start telling all of them, I'll perhaps use the entire half an hour. But here are some of the really notable ones that I would really like to share with everyone. So Krishnaswamy Vijayaraghavan is our Principal Scientific Advisor. He's the fellow of the Royal Society called as FRS. Besides that, he is a distinguished professor and advisor for the most premier research institute that we have in India, TIFR, the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. He's also a protein. He is the key advisor for Government of India, and three primary things that he's driving: building the scientific policies, the strategy required for any technology development or scientific work, as well as driving innovation for the country. I must tell you the three principal scientific advisors that India has had since 1999. The very first one is the very eminent Dr. A.P. Dr. N.R. Chidambaram, whose research in the nuclear physics are very notable. He supported the Bhabha Atomic Center. And the third one, the current one, is our very eminent Vijay Raghavan. So very honored to meet you, sir, again. And I must remind you, the very first week, April 3rd, I remember you were nominated as the principal scientific advisor. And that very same week, sir, I met you in Delhi. So it's my honor to talk. So I will start, since I know you from the very first week, I have this level of comfort. So when I was asked to facilitate this fire chat, I thought nothing better than talking to, the one person that I respect so much. So, sir, feel comfortable to stop me if you don't like the question. If you want to answer a question that you think is more relevant, please do so. So, if I may, my very first question is that the Prime Minister has constituted a council, which is called, the Science, Technology and Innovation Advisory Council, and you are the chair for this council. My belief is that the goal or the vision is to comprehend challenges, to look at formulating a specific interventions roadmap, and advise the Prime Minister. Sir, so besides this advisory council, do you believe leadership like mine and others would be valuable to you in building this futuristic technology roadmap?
Thank you very much, Nivriti. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. And I'm really happy and grateful to be here on this panel with all of you over here. Now, the Prime Minister's Science, Technology and Innovation Advisory Council has people from academia, industry, social sector, who get together along with secretaries to major government departments linked with science to discuss the way ahead for major programs. Now remember that each ministry, each department has its own programs. And of course, the private sector and our academia have their own programs. So this is not a body which tells people what to do, but looks at the ecosystem and plans what necessarily are the directions we can take. That advice then goes to the government, which implements it through its ministries. More recently, there's a new group which has been formed by Cabinet. It's called the Empowered Technology Group. And the purpose of that is to bring coordination in large budget efforts across ministries so that we are aware in terms of technology, what different ministries are developing, manufacturing, procuring, so that there can be coordination in action, both in procurement, but also in policy and R&D.
Fantastic. So we are there with you, sir. Whenever you need any partnership, you know that we work wonderfully together. Since you talk about R&D, research and development in India has seen significant growth. We now are in the top 5 countries globally contributing to scientific papers. I know we have ways to compete in terms of patterns. What are some of your thoughts in trying to address some of the bottlenecks in attracting the best talent to our academia, to our industries, to the different participants? What are some of the bottlenecks that you see that we could address together?
Well, in terms of institutional development, what is needed to attract the best talent to an institute is culture. If the institute has a positive attitude in receiving people, welcoming them, and an environment where people work together, then better and better people keep coming. So that results in a sort of institutional growth of quality. But that quality is not sufficient, though it's necessary to deliver. One has to have a clarity on what the institutional goals are. Those goals are often set from outside. If you don't set those goals clearly, then that quality feeds back onto itself internally into navel gazing and becoming better and better at less and less with poor connect to the outside. So it is up to us as society, as industry, as government to set institutional challenges so that institutions can respond and use their quality for larger purpose. That happens in some places.
Very good, sir. So you're saying, culture can be a little bit modified. We need to show more, more. Second of technology, when we look at space and nuclear programs, when we were looking at a lot, I contribute, but do you think that this space and nuclear programs are sufficient, or must focus on to drive growth? What are 1, 2, 3 areas that you think that we should do more, sir?
Thank you, Nivriti. The audio was breaking up, but the nice thing about the English language is that it's about 50% redundant, and one can guess what the question is. So I'll quickly reframe the question. You pointed out that we focus a lot in terms of R&D on space and nuclear programs. Is that sufficient? Do we need to look at other programs too? And I think that's absolutely right. We need to do those programs much better, and we also need to do other things well. Now, space recently, the cabinet has completely restructured the space interaction with industry. There's a new structure called In Space, which will work to attract industry projects to ISRO and allow that to, that collaboration to grow the space program in big ways. And that's really path-breaking. And ISRO has taken this leadership in this and is taking this forward. So you're going to see much more happening in space. Along those same lines, whether it is in agriculture, in health, for example, these are two very important areas, we will have to see similar restructuring. Again, I'd like to stress the internal capacity in our R&D is enormous. So it's not a problem about the precision of means which are there. It is the very good goal articulation which we need to bring these means into the goals. That's happened in space and atomic energy. Similar articulation of goals in other areas would be valuable. For example, if you had a clear goal, which the Prime Minister announced today, that in 100 cities we're going to make them pollution-free. Well, that's a good goal. Now that puts all of us into action to formulate how we can form centers of excellence in, for example, Ahmedabad or Indore or Mumbai or Bangalore or Hyderabad, and have these look at waste and pollution in every possible way and to sort that. So these articulation of goals will help us a lot.
Thank you very much, Vijay. And I really apologize. I don't know, just today my internet connection has to go bad. I have some questions. Sorry?
It's good now.
Oh, perfect, perfect. So I have some questions that the audience has, submitted, Vijay. The very first question is, what are the science and innovation clusters and the role of government where industry and academia can join and play in? Now, what are some of the clusters that you believe that the rest industry and academia can join in partnership?
Thank you, Nivruti. I don't know where our audience is distributed, but let's, for example, assume that some of them are in Delhi and in South Delhi. In South Delhi, if you start from Delhi University South Campus and then go on to JNU, IIT, All India Institute, three major institutes of the Department of Biotechnology, the Nuclear Research Center, the Indian Statistical Institute, and a bunch of other institutes in the Qutb institutional area. If these institutions were to act as one without compromising their autonomy, you have a Stanford or a Berkeley sitting right there. But they not only have challenges acting as one, within those institutions, the departments and individual researchers have challenges working together. So what is the kind of institutional enabling umbrella one can create, incentivize that, both by giving what I'd like to say some incentives so that they are attracted to go and do things, but also some pressures that they are pushed to do those kinds of things. And that is eminently feasible now. So we have had major discussions on this, and starting off primarily at the beginning with the Bangalore, Chennai region, Hyderabad, Pune, Mumbai, Delhi. We're getting these clusters in place where institutions will have an enabling, functioning environment right from their academic activities, right up to major missions which they take together. And this is something which is eminently feasible. Now, what happened after we formulated this, just afterwards, before we could get started, we had the pandemic start. That quite naturally brought people to work together and have a shared sense of purpose. Now the challenge we have is to continue to have this shared sense of purpose with these institutions, with partnering with local, national, and global industry to solve problems. And I think that's eminently feasible.
Thank you very much, Vijay. Another question that I must ask is, again, coming from the audience, is what can India do to compete with other countries when it comes to social innovations? The second part of the question is, can you talk specifically about the role of capital and talent required for this? And I know, the countries may not be mentioned, but China, for example, there's a lot of competition that people talk about from China, and considering a lot of geopolitical issues, what are some of the areas that you think India should stand up in terms of social innovations? And I'm very excited I'm asking you this because, your contributions in biology, your contributions with TIFR talks a lot about what you are driving from health perspective. And, from AI, what you and I have partnered with, of course, IIIT Hyderabad and few other contributors, and education. So just wanted to hear, a little bit more elaborate on what are some of the social innovations India could step up and do.
If you look at any of our important sectors, health, agriculture, jobs, skills, and so on and so forth, there are two sort of different peaks of viewpoints. One thinks that we can do anything, and the other thinks we can do nothing. And the reality is that this is a very complex world, and each of these topics require judicious, careful choice and a combination of both tactics and strategy. In today's interconnected world, it's not possible to just be technologically good and scientifically good. You need to be able to do that, in addition, be competitive globally. Now, the pandemic has shown the dangers of having strong and few nodes in global supply chains. When they break, suddenly everything goes for a toss. And India and many countries responded well to that break in global supply chains, and now we need to go ahead. When we need to go ahead, when we build up, so the way I would like to put it is, the rope which is made up of politics, economics, science, technology, and people, which seemed so stable and strong till the end of last year, has become completely unraveled. Now we have to put that in place together. And we should therefore now put it together in a new way which benefits people at large. How can we do that? And a short answer is, whether it's a social sector or anywhere else, we must understand that the world has changed dramatically in the last decade, where there's an extraordinary value for ideas coupled with action. So design coupled with action and everything is very, very important. So the cyber physical becomes important, but also ideas in multiple kinds of areas of work. Therefore, India, with its young demography, with a large number of young people, can exponentially grow when it anchors design as its key role and exports that as an R&D rather than low-end R&D. And then connect that with the physical. Now, high-tech physical will take a little longer to develop. That requires major investment and bringing things together and a different kind of integration with supply chains. That's a linear slope going upwards, but the idea revolution can be exponentially upwards.
Lovely. I love the way you explained it, that, focus on design, focus on R&D, look at deployment, but then, don't ignore the supply chain, manufacturing, all of that sector. And you're saying start gradually. You can't be, driving the highest level of automation and robotics, but start small. Let's look at components and build, manufacturing out of India. And so do both. And in order to do both, I think what is really required, Vijay, is a lot of policy regulatory requirement. And my own view, considering I have partnered with you on a road accident avoidance, I'm partnering with you on AI for health and with CSIR and all. What I think would really be nice is to have, a sandbox regulatory approval for many of these inventions, innovations, such that we can start with a POC and not have to worry for about a year or 2 years to get the regulatory support. But when we do mass scale deployment, then we, look at all of these regulations. So do you believe this sandbox regulation and policy could be made available for people who are driving such innovations?
Absolutely. And not only can it be made available, we have started, de facto experimenting with that during this crisis. There are many speeded up regulatory requirements without compromising on quality, which we needed to do at this time. So, what we thought always takes time can be done in a much shorter period, both by these innovative approaches, but also doing the routine much better. We had earlier had globally, we had a viewpoint that regulation was like good wine, that it matures with age. And therefore, the longer a process takes, somehow the more valid it is. Now, that attitude has certainly gone for a toss. And so, without compromising on quality, ideas like sandboxes and so on will actually be welcomed much more than before.
Thank you, Vijay. Another question, and people are pouring out questions, so I'm like, making sure I'm looking at the audience questions and not just, continue asking what I want to. So the next question is, and I'm going to start with a quote that I think I have definitely shared with you, is the growth of a country comes from entrepreneurs, comes from innovation, and with the support of policymakers. This is, a famous quote by an American economist called David Aldrich. So the point is, how do we encourage our startups? I know that we are third or fourth startup nations. We have, several unicorns. The number of months or years required for the unicorn is getting smaller. But how can the industry, both local and global, help? How can government contribute a little bit more? And my thought was, this was the audience question. My thought is, Vijay, a lot of companies like ours are driving a lot of CSR activities. 2 to 3% of their investment they are driving. Is it possible to leverage all of that CSR budget, and without asking for more, drive more of startup kind of areas where the country will benefit from, leveraging all of this CSR money, as well as other contributions like many of these companies have startup incubators. What are your thoughts there? How can we drive more? How can we push more in terms of funding?
Well, there are at least 3 components which startups need to grow in a big way. And the first certainly is funding. And last year, what we did is we pushed, after lots of discussions, to have the corporate social responsibility rules changed so that now CSR funds can be used for supporting startups and incubators. So if there are startups associated with incubators, associated with the central government or the state government, then they can get CSR funding. So that's really something very good. That allows those resources to be used in multiple ways. So, but the second more fundamental issue which startups have is a bootstrapping. Are they bringing value to industry, and is industry seeing value in them? And are they together seeing the growth of a satellite ecosystem surrounding that industry, which is really high quality startups? That's a combination of infrastructure and a cultural issue, which are addressable. So surrounding big manufacturing hubs, you need to have a strong startup ecosystem linked to that, but also linked globally. That has happened in some places and that needs to grow. But the third component, which is really critical, which needs to come about, is a shakeup in our academic interaction. Our academic system has been the source of many of these startups. IIT Madras's startup ecosystem is fantastic. It was barely a shell a few years ago, and now it's just bursting at the seams. IIT Delhi and IIT Bombay have followed, and others are following too. But a strong characteristic of them, even though that's changing, is that these startups are taking on technologies which are self-evidently there and setting them up in a frugal and innovative manner so that what costs, say, $30 abroad costs $3 here, and you can be competent. And that's a great way to do things. But that's not the only way. In addition, our academic ecosystem today allows us to have startups compete internationally right away and do things which are really cutting edge. That daring comes when faculty members are more directly involved in more and more startups. That needs to happen. It's happening in our engineering institutions. It must happen a lot more in our research institutions.
Thank you very much, Vijay. And I must tell you that me as Intel is partnering with IIT Mumbai's startup effort. They have this group called Sign within IIT Mumbai. And Intel, IIT Mumbai, and Department of Science and Technology are partnering for incubating many startups. I'm very proud that we're doing good work there. The next question is, oftentimes these social challenges are very complex. And when you look at VC funding, the VC funding is going towards problems that are not necessarily social. Yes, they are cutting edge technology like AI. You say AI and the startup gets funded. But the question is, many of these social challenges are very complex. How do we get the VCs and the funding people to fund these complex social problems that help the humanity? And the second question is, it's similar. How do you get talented people to work towards these social challenges?
So, the attraction of people to come and work on social questions in a big way comes in two iconic extremes. There are people who dedicate their lives and do that. They're very inspirational. They're there at the grassroots. They raise resources and they show extraordinary proof of concept. Then there are others who have become extremely wealthy and fund NGOs and fund big programs and do that. Both of them are invaluable. There's no question about that. But we need to have a different situation, a different approach in addition, which has effectively crowdsources responsibility and puts that responsibility in two more sectors amongst us citizens. And therefore, we should fund, even however little we can, we should fund big aims, big goals, big structures. All of Cancer Research UK, for example, is funded by crowdsourced distributions, and it's one of the largest philanthropic organizations in the world, and it funds cancer research. So the demand for solutions through research and innovation should come from people also, and people putting their money, even however minuscule, they put their money there. Similarly, people should also make demands on their elected officials, municipal officials, city officials, state officials, of the government, to solve complex problems and work as partners with them. If we don't have that connect with our political system as a demand in addition, then we will not have the ability to solve problems, because that connect is absolutely essential. So things are changing a lot. You see a lot of really high quality NGOs, corporates coming in. Citizens should come in a lot more. And my feeling is a sense of pride in your city or your village or your area of work will cause dramatic changes.
Thank you very much, Vijay. I really loved talking to you, enjoyed your answers as usual. But one thing I want to tell the audience before I hand it over to Pooja, that if you look at, Vijay, he is very, very approachable. For me, as Intel India head, he's helped. I try to reach out to people, and I'm trying to see how I can create value and contributions. The one introduction that I wanted to say for the last, he's a wonderful human being. If you have an idea that you believe can, contribute and value, create value for India, please reach out to him. He's a great support and a great partner for me. And I am sure he'll be a great support and great partner for you. Besides helping you with all the policy regulatory stuff, his intellect, his ability to connect is awesome. Thank you very much, Vijay. And continue shining and taking India forward. So over to you, Pooja.
Thank you, Navratri. That's excessively generous and a lot to live up to, but thank you very, very much for a wonderful evening.
Likewise, Vijay. Have a great evening. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. Yeah, thanks a lot, sir, and thanks, Ms. Rai, for this discussion. It was actually very, very engaging. Actually, very exciting than actually that I imagined. Thank you for sharing for all the key insights on developments that are taking place in the field of science and technology in India, and also for sharing some valuable suggestions on enhancing institutional workings for greater advancement. Thanks once again, both of you, for joining us. Coming up next is a very, very interesting segment. Before that, let me tell you that if you're viewing this from any of our platforms, the Nash Foundation's YouTube page, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, as well as Quinn's YouTube channel, if you have any questions, you can put it down in the Q&A tab. We're taking it actively. Now, moving on, we have a very exciting session coming up. We have with us celebrity chef Vikas Khanna. In the recent past, especially in the COVID times, we've seen Vikas Khanna take up community service as his personal agenda. Let's hear more about this from him. To engage him in a conversation, we have Shelly Walia, who's a senior journalist from Quint. Over to you, Shelly.
Thank you. I cannot see because hello there, hello. It's such an honor to be sitting across from you on my system and talking to you. Thank you so much for talking to us and taking out the time. As Pooja described you, we've seen a completely different side of you during this pandemic. You've reached out to millions of people in India. You targeted 25 million meals right at the beginning of the pandemic, and here you are months down and the mission is accomplished. So I will just want to ask you first, you are a Michelin star chef, you are an author, you are a filmmaker, and this during this pandemic में हमने आपका बिल्कुल ही दूसरा रूप देखा है जहाँ पे आप एक humanitarian के तौर पे सामने आए हैं. I'm sorry, I'm a bit nervous because I'm sitting right across from you, so I'm very excited but also very nervous. So सबसे पहले तो मैं आपसे ये पूछना चाहती हूँ कि ऐसा क्या है जो विकास खन्ना नहीं कर सकते हैं? तो मेरा सबसे पहले आपसे ये सवाल है.
मैं सूटकेस पैक नहीं कर सकता हूँ पहली बात. I can't do basic stuff. I can't hear. Yeah, I can't hear like instructions from the air hostess. I can't. I don't. It just slips my mind. I have this kind of. I just can't pack my bag. I have a very big problem because if there's also, I've been traveling like crazy. I still forget things. I forget my passports. I forget everything. The basic life is a total mess.
Wow.
But I'm okay with that now. I've accepted the fact that I was not cut out for that.
So for a Michelin star chef to have such a regular basic problem, that's very comforting to know, let me tell you. So आप India से इतनी दूर बैठे हुए हैं और अभी we know the time difference, it's more than 12 hours. How do you manage your time and how are you able to do this? And if you can tell our viewers a little bit more about Feed India, what you have been able to do. You have targeted sections of people who are the most sidelined. Let me give a few examples. You have looked after, I should say looked after the widows in Vrindavan. You have looked after the boatmen in Varanasi. आपने बहुत ही targeted लोगों को help पहुंचाई है. So how do you manage your time? Sitting so far away from India, this long distance relationship, and how are you able to do such a huge, massive project sitting from there?
We started the whole operation on April 1st, or that time I decided, this has to be done because there will be shortages. India declared lockdown March end. So we knew it's a month end, and a lot of these places are dependent on monthly donations of dry rations or donations. And right now, everyone is vulnerable. So मुझे लगा कि यहाँ पे problem हो सकती है. उसके बाद I just feel कि the time difference thing about day and night, it's actually really helped me because it got me time to plan the whole thing. Next day, it got me time. Before India would wake up, so I'll always tweet, before India wakes up, this is our agenda right now. These are the cities we are covering. These are the foundations we are collaborating with. And NDRF, National Disaster Response Force, was the biggest partners we had. So we were very clear. I think the time difference gave me, and also I put everything on the back burner. A lot of people did not know that, I had a restaurant which had to open and everything got delayed. But we still opened it yesterday. We still opened it and it is jam-packed right now. We are full. We are doing double seating right now. We just opened and I'm proud of it that people want to support this. And this is first time it's happened that I'm not there for opening of the restaurant. I don't open restaurants too much, because I am very, very emotional about opening a place because I feel it's an extension of me and my family and my city and my country. And I feel कि वो बहुत ध्यान से करना चाहिए आपको because everything gets judged through you, your work. So पहली बार I opened a restaurant on Zoom calls and on video calls and emails. Generally, I'm always stationed there 20 hours. But we also figured out the Feed India was the priority and I put everything else on the back burners. I have 4 books which had to be submitted. I delayed everything. I said, my mom said everything can wait, but the people who are hungry walking on the highways, they can't. So I just set up my moral compass through my mother.
Wow.
And I think I manage my time well because I am very focused and I don't get emotionally, derailed very fast. Because जो करना होता है, I move very straightforward. That is the reason you could do so much. And we have 2 documentaries which we finished during the pandemic, and I have such a huge feature film coming out. And we were doing everything in a very organized way, but everything was put on the back burner since April 1st because even people who were sending me letters from the lawyers, I hope they're hearing me now, that I was delayed in my projects and delayed my submissions. And we have a very big, एक ना बहुत बड़ा cycle में चलता हूँ मैं. So everything is disciplined to a different level. इस time पे ये submission है. I had just finished MasterChef India, March mid, and that is when, you went, and because Master of India is quite time consuming. So I felt, okay, when I go back to US, I should be able to finish all these projects. Everything was timed day by day. But you're right, that Feed India gave me another dimension of life. मेरे को लगता है कि it is bigger than, even if I win 3 Michelin stars, I'll never be so satisfied the way this was.
That's so beautiful, Vikas. Just want to understand, आपने अपनी माँ की बात की. In one of the recent interviews, you actually said that how your idea of hunger does not come from India, but it comes from America, and it created quite a buzz. Trust me, all the Indian media channels were quite moved to hear that from you. So if you can give us a little bit of a glimpse, as in, मतलब आपका जो struggle रहा है, and you are a complete success story. So how did you kind of relate? How do you associate the idea of hunger to America and not to India?
India में there is certain thing कि कोई ना कोई आपको खाना खिला देगा. And also, of course, I say very openly, the Western media wants to play that all the time, that they gave me the platform, and all the success stories and everything happened as something which was absolutely globalization of Indian food. And they did it. And I just keep telling them, you did not do it. And I have a very big problem when people take credit of anything, because I give credit to my mother and father, and no one else deserves that. And all my life, like after the success started happening step by step, I used to hear this word a lot: we made you.
Yeah.
I will have a lot of Western media come to me and say, we made you. And a lot of European Americans will say, we made you. And a lot of people whom I worked with, they will always say, you made you. I said, you know what? Actually, you did not make me. I was only made by my parents. And I have stuck on to that. And it gives me gravity when I say that. And I mean it. And so wo jo interview mein I was trying to tell BBC tha ke,
It was a
CNN, BBC. So BBC mein the guy asked me, you come from not a well-to-do family, and look at the American dream you're living, and you must have understood hunger from India. In India, there is something about people, the way they share food. And many times it happened because we used to travel from Delhi all the way to Manipur, to Palghat, and then to Mangalore. And it was almost like a 32 hours train ride to go to college. अगर आपके पास खाना नहीं है ना, तब भी कोई ना कोई खिला देगा. You sit there and somebody will share it. And I have said, this is very basic ethos of India. And I did not understand hunger from India so much as I did from New York, because here nobody shares like that. People have charity work, which is done through organizations and foundations, but India does this on an individual scale. So I say that I was trying to explain to them later when I got such a, of course, when you have something which goes viral, we also have setback of that. And I said, just have to remember that India runs on 1.3 billion foundations. If America has 40 different great foundations, India has 1.3. So on individual capacity, what we contribute is phenomenal. It's just, it's even if it's small contribution, it could be just sharing of, you're eating something and somebody says, "Acha, ye bhi taste kar lo." I just feel that doesn't happen in the Western world because we are very law oriented here. And you don't want anyone to come after you saying that, "Adit, tune mujhe khilaya tha, I felt sick," sue them. So I think the answer came from that moment, and I somehow feel when people target my city, Amritsar, I get a little defensive, and I always have to say, you don't understand India you understand India from a very small spectrum of Slumdog Millionaire, and you've not been able to expand yourself to see that how much layers India lives in.
As a filmmaker, I would urge you to make more movies about India so that people get a better picture of what the country is about. I just have another question before I can probably let you go. You managed to open a restaurant, Elora, that you just mentioned, while you are sitting in New York and the restaurant is in Dubai. I mean, हमारा Zoom से चल जाता है काम. I mean, हम digital organizations में काम कर रहे हैं and हमारा चल जाता है. But I'm very fascinated by the fact that you have been able to kind of share recipes with people who will be working back in Dubai, and how did that coordination go? And also because food is so much about smell. So just if you can tell me a little, they taste it and kind of like give you a feedback.
So we were working on this project. Ashish is the head chef,
and I've worked with Ashish for many years, and Ashish knows me in and out when I'm. And the thing is that I don't have a very outrageous demeanor. I get upset, but I don't have. I don't remember shouting. पता नहीं बहुत साल हो गए मुझे की होगी unconsciously, but because of my, I think a mother's genes, no, I am extremely, in any emergency also, I'm calm. And people think, you know, what the hell is this? I'll lose my wallet and the cops are saying you must be joking because you're so calm. And I'm like, I don't know how to be unrestful exterior, like in outside, but being calm also helps you in executing this project. But I do say that, you know, it was very difficult for me and to have a restaurant because, you know, it's a labor of love. But when we started figuring out that, you know, we have to do it because there's a lot of, it creates jobs, it creates opportunities, it creates guest services, experiences. So when we said, and it also talks, it's so easy to sit on Zoom call and talk about positivity and let's be positive and let's get the industry back to its toes. I feel that by example karna bahut hi, it is a little difficult to do that, to live by that example. I said, let's set an example that during this pandemic, we'll never forget it, that we actually opened a full-fledged, full operational restaurant with food which is totally different, and you know, you're very, very proud of it actually. Yeah. It's just like somebody who's just given birth to some little baby and who sees that life is being introduced to the world.
That's amazing. Once another question that I had from you was that since we are talking about restaurants, and you just a couple of minutes ago told us how jam-packed the restaurant is, how do you think that it's going to change at all as to how people look at restaurants, how people go out after, like before, during the pandemic? Like, how is that going to change?
Everything is going to change about the hospitality industry. It's the most vulnerable industry right now. If you see what's happening in New York, there was an article in Eater yesterday. They do not even know how many restaurants have been shut down permanently because restaurants are not opening. So there's so many restaurants. They're just saying 1,000 restaurants closed in the duration of 8 weeks. Just last 8 weeks, 1,000 restaurants in Manhattan, like the capital of dining on the planet. And they don't even know how many restaurants are shut down who are not, like, we don't know about them right now. So it's a little, I think it's a little rebirth which is going to happen in hospitality. We will have to follow the norms what the government sets for us or the medical experts set for us. And even if you see that, you know, how we are distancing the counters in the kitchen and how we distance, I don't know if you've seen the images of Elora, that how this could easily seat 250 to 300 diners, but we have almost like 60 or almost 70 seats in the dining room. And I think that is also that, you know, the thing is that we might have to do more covers to survive, to sustain. But everything is going to change about hospitality. Even the food chains are shifting. It's a big thing happening. I was just speaking to a farmer in the morning from India, and they said, you know, we lost the cycle of crop because this pandemic happened and we couldn't do the harvest. And then after that, we couldn't do the processing. And then after that, we didn't sow during the rainy season because we don't have so much of labor around. So we are going to, there's a big shift happening in the global stage of crops, harvest. And that was my big PhD, which I'm doing on pollination. And this time, this is like, there's no sowing. But I think it's okay. As humans, we are extremely adaptable and we will be coming back stronger than before. Of course, there will be a big shift happening. And I don't know why I'm saying that, but I hope it happens.
Okay.
It's hard. It's very hurtful to see that the only industry but you know, it's for me is also, I invest in a lot of different industries. So for me, arts is the most important subject. Of course, food being top of the pyramids. But I feel that it's a little difficult for seeing that there are no returns happening right now. It's difficult.
Okay, on that note, I'll have to let you go, Mr. Khanna. Thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on your new restaurant and congratulations on all the amazing work you are doing. All our best wishes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Shelly, and thanks, Vikasji, for joining us today. I think one of the personal takeaways that I had today was to learn how to stay calm and positive all through. And overall, I think I would.
I'm telling you, I lost my passport or my wallet, and the officers won't believe me. Saying, but you're so calm. I said, what do you, I don't know how to shout.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's one personal takeaway from me. So thanks a lot for joining us. Congratulations on your new restaurant, Alora, and all the very best for your journey.
Thank you for introducing us.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks a lot. Thanks, Shelly. For the next session, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Raj Punjabi to the Nudge Forum. He's a CEO and co-founder of Last Mile Health, founded by the survivors of Liberia's civil war. Last Mile Health's mission is to save lives in the world's most remote communities, and there's surely a lot we would like to know about how Dr. Raj Punjabi paved his path as a change maker. To help us with that, we have Mr. Rohit Khanna, Executive Director at The Quint. Handing it over to you, Rohit. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Pooja. Dr. Punjabi, we've never met, but a quick hi. I'm particularly fascinated by the backstory, so I just want to quickly go over that. Dr. Punjabi's family, out of choice and out of circumstances, has traveled all over the world. His family, due to the partition, they had to move from Sindh to Bombay in 1947. Then, I think out of choice, the family chose to move to West Africa, to the country of Liberia. Then there was civil war there. And at the age of 9, Dr. Punjabi had to move to the US, to Carolina. And he threw himself into medicine, became a fantastic doctor, and then surprised everyone by coming right back to the place where he was born, to Liberia, and set up at a very, very young age an organization called Last Mile Health. I think you were just 26 then, Dr. Punjabi?
That's right, yes.
Yeah, so that amazing amount of stuff that you've done at such a young age. Last Mile Health is about something that is really absent from our a lot of what we think about health. That is literally the last mile health, the community health workers, people who work with people in the rural areas, in the hinterland, where health infrastructure does not reach. And Dr. Punjabi, I think in your childhood, that whole background helped you understand that. If you can give us a sense of what pushed you to create Last Mile Health. What is it about your backstory and your experiences that created Last Mile Health? Why did you prioritize that over everything else in the field of medicine?
Well, thank you, Rohit. And this is such an important day for India. And I appreciate you sharing the story of my grandparents who fled Sindh and lost their homeland. And yes, that is what sent my family to Liberia. So one was a personal connection to West Africa. I mean, Liberia, after our civil war, had only 51 doctors left to serve a country of 4 million people. And this would be like, Washington, D.C. or London having 8 or 10 doctors to serve the entire city. So a huge shortage of doctors. So I was partly moved by the problem, and having trained as a doctor, I wanted to have a chance to contribute to the country that had given me so much. But I have to say, part of it was inspired by India itself. On my way back to Liberia, I visited my late Nani in Mumbai and my Nana, and I had a chance to go to Eastern Maharashtra state, where I met Dr. Abhay and Rani Bang, who are the founders of Search in Gadchiroli district. And they had done this powerful work over many years, where they had managed to lower the death rate amongst our newborns in India in tribal areas by training and hiring the tribal women themselves to be health workers and be part of the healthcare team. And in fact, Abhay and Rani's work inspired me so much, we named our firstborn child Abhay after him. And a few months later, I went back to Liberia, and I was moved by the power of that idea that if we look beyond our walls in healthcare, beyond our clinics, beyond our hospitals, and if we invest in the people closest to the pain, those that might be the neighbors of patients, we could have not only better access to healthcare, but we could do better in terms of the quality of healthcare and have greater justice in our healthcare system and make it more fair, I should say. So that's, Rohit, what really connected me. It was both the combination of the outrage of seeing people die from conditions no one should die from in the 21st century, HIV, complications of childbirth, but then also the power and the hope and the potential to change that based on examples like the one in Eastern Maharashtra state in Gadchiroli.
So Raj, you would have obviously been following what's happening in West Africa, and I'm assuming also to a large extent how COVID has been moving across India. As someone who specializes in community health in the hinterland, and now we can see how in places in the hinterland of Maharashtra, in states like Bihar, Bengal, and I think to some extent it would be perhaps the same thing panning out in West Africa where testing is very low. What is it that community health workers, what is it that can be done at the hinterland to get COVID under control in those areas? Because I think the cities have they've got the infrastructure. What about those outlying areas?
Yeah, well, I think it's such an important question, Rohit. You know, I've had the chance in my career as a doctor on the front lines, as well as leading Last Mile Health, to respond to epidemics like HIV, Ebola in West Africa, which killed so many of our people, and now COVID here in Boston, and also supporting the training of health workers in Africa. And you know what we've learned, if there's one thing I've learned throughout all of this, it's this simple point, is that outbreaks start and stop in communities. We need hospitals, we need clinics. Those, as you mentioned, exist in cities. In rural areas, they're sparse. And we just can't stop COVID or any epidemic unless we extend the reach of healthcare into communities themselves. And so one of the best ways to do that is actually to hire and train and equip people from the community, even those without a high school degree. In fact, most community health workers lack even a high school qualification, to join the healthcare team. And so in Africa, what they're doing, and we're working in Liberia, also in support of Ethiopia and Malawi as well, we're training thousands of those community and frontline health workers, the nurses who supervise them, to go door to door to screen patients for COVID symptoms. Do you have a fever? Do you have shortness of breath? Do you have a cough? Do you have a sore throat? And make sure that those patients get tested quickly, and make sure that those who are test positive get into care quickly. If they need to be isolated at home, that they get support, but also if they get sick, that they come into the hospital more quickly. And the last thing, of course, is to make sure that tracing happens, you know, making sure that the people exposed to that patient are supported, followed, and monitored for symptoms. So that's a critical aspect. But, you know, one other thing we know, Rohit, from COVID and other epidemics is that these epidemics don't just devastate our immune systems, they devastate our health systems. So millions more children will die from malaria during this time across the poorest countries on earth, including India, because their health workers have been infected by COVID, or the health systems have been overwhelmed by COVID. So one of the critical things community health workers are doing is, in fact, finding a community-based way, door to door, to keep malaria testing and treatment going. So for example, in Liberia, the community health workers are testing and treating 1 out of 2 rural children in the country for malaria, and saving lives because of that. So they've been able to keep that going because now they're putting on the masks and the gowns and the gloves and getting the support. And I should also mention that across India, Last Mile Health has been involved with our colleagues at Harvard University and a number of partners through an initiative called the Community Health Academy, where we've been training leaders of community health programs in India. And thousands have enrolled in our online courses covering COVID and community health. And, you know, we have content available there in Hindi, and we're finding that, in fact, some of the same dynamic exists in India. And I think you know the story, and we could get into it, of the fact that of India's 1 million women on the front lines, these ASHA workers and other community-based providers, they are on the front lines doing the same kind of work as Liberia. But the challenge here, Rohit, is that our governments, our leaders, our health systems have to better support these workers. I think many of them in India, just in the last week, have gone on strike for 2 days because they don't have the protective equipment on the front lines, and they're not getting the living fair wage that they deserve.
So I was going to actually talk a bit about it, but you already brought it up. Raj, what is your strategy when you deal with the government, with the state government, with the district magistrate, with the police official? How much patience do you show? What is your strategy? How do you get these guys to buy into what you are doing? And because there's so much classism, casteism here, the ASHA worker is not treated, with the dignity that she should get. How do you deal with that?
Right. Right. I mean, I was speaking about the dignity, right? There's a woman named Badwan Devi. She's a community health worker in India who's knocking on doors to find patients with COVID. And she was quoted in an interview I did with PBS NewsHour a few weeks ago. She said, "I don't have the salary. I can buy gloves or pay the rent or feed myself. What do I do?" So what is this? This is a story of an individual in our country, in India, who is struggling to both care for her community and be cared for by the society and the government that she's in. So I think one key thing that we do is to humanize women like Badwan. But the other thing we have to do is to make sure we remember that power is not given. It must be demanded. So we have to stand with them to demand equal pay for equal work. So this is one of the critical things. When you look around the world, $1 trillion of women's contribution to healthcare globally, 1 trillion goes unpaid. That's larger than the economies of 150 countries, $1 trillion. So this is because so many of them are, as you said, under-recognized. So this is a second area, is to really push the governments that are resistant. Now, other governments, and I think India is one of them, actually is interested. They have this cadre, the 1 million or so community health workers across India. But now the issue is to say, look, you're spending a very little amount on your public health system. And this is a problem in so many countries, including here in the United States, where COVID is running wild. I mean, the few countries in the world that have crossed 2 million coronavirus cases are United States. India is amongst them. So we need the public health workforce at the community level. So there, what we're trying to argue is to say, look, we all agree it's the right thing to do to pay these women, to pay community health workers, to invest in these health workers, to protect them with the equipment. But it turns out it's also the smart thing to do economically. So that's the third thing, is to really sit with them, to analyze what is the return on investment here. And you'll be surprised, for every dollar we invest in paying a community health worker and supporting her, society gets $10 in return from not only outbreaks prevented. Imagine how many trillions of dollars have been lost from COVID, how much better we could have had a response if we maybe would have stopped the spread so widely. That alone is a clear argument for one way these workers return to the economy. The other one, of course, is that they save lives, they extend life years, like the children in Gadchiroli. But the third one, Rohit, and it's one that finance ministers and heads of state and prime ministers ought to be thinking about right now. We have had to slow our economies. When we slow our economies to stop COVID, we also lose jobs. So right now, every country has to recover their economy. Why not give jobs, well-paying jobs, to women like those Ashas who can both save lives and be a venue for you to create millions of jobs? This is the third argument, is that they create jobs. So those are the three things: the moral, the pressure when governments are refusing to pay attention, and when they pay attention, to help them see that there's an economic argument for this as well, not just a moral one.
Raj, I think we've zipped through the little bit of time that we had, but you've said a lot in very little time, and it has been exercising us, because we are in a newsroom at the Quint and we are wrestling all day with what is it that we can do. We're so metrocentric. Our stories keep swinging around Delhi and Mumbai. We almost never get to Gadchiroli. You've been there. I hate to admit I've not been there, but and one has heard about both the couple, Dr. Bam and his wife, but our attention doesn't go there often enough. our attention doesn't go. These ASHA workers are protesting at Jantar Mantar, but we don't see the cameras land up there and give them a voice. I hope that changes. This idea that you've had that these ASHA workers could be economic engines, give them jobs, make them, they even become consumers, so that could all happen. Thanks for saying all of this. It's really close to our heart. Thank you so much for giving us your time, and lovely to have met you and spoken to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rohit. And let me just say, because this is such an important day for India, and this is such a painful moment for everyone. We're all feeling this pain from COVID in one form or another from this pandemic. So I'll just share something my father shared in closing. It's just that, in West Africa, we have a saying, no condition is permanent. No condition is permanent. And I think when I think about the hard times in this pandemic, I really turn back to that lesson from my father. We're not defined by the conditions we face. We're defined by how we respond. And so let this be a chance for us to extend equity and healthcare to all of India's people by investing in the people themselves. So thank you so much, Rohit. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll try to do that also. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Raj Punjabi, and thanks, Rohit, for facilitating such a beautiful session. One thing that really stood out to me in the session is, first thing is, I think no condition is permanent. That's the first takeaway for me. And the second is, power is not given, it is demanded. So I think that really stuck with me. And thanks a lot, Dr. Raj Punjabi, for all the work that you're doing with the ASHA workers, the community workers, and all the best for your journey going forward. Thank you, Rohit. We have a very interesting session coming up next. We have Lord Meghnad Desai in conversation with Alkesh Wadhwani. We're waiting for Lord Meghnad Desai to join in. Stay tuned in. We'll just get back to you in a couple of minutes, waiting for Lord Desai. Yeah. Lord Desai is here. Welcome, sir. It's a great honor to welcome you as our next speaker. Lord Meghnad Desai is the recipient of the 3rd highest civilian award in India. In India, the Padma Bhushan Award. I welcome Lord Meghnad Jagdish Chandra Desai. To facilitate the conversation with Lord Desai, I would like to introduce Mr. Alkesh Wadhwani. He leads the Poverty Elevation Portfolio for the Gates Foundation's India Country Office, which comprises of programmatic work in agriculture, development, water, sanitation, and hygiene, financial services for the poor, and gender equality. Lovely to have you with us over here. Over to you, Alkesh.
Thank you, Pooja. It's great to have this chat with you, Lord Desai. I'll say a few words about you. You are very well known, of course, but still, if you don't mind, I'd say a few words. As Pooja said, you are a well-known economist and a Labour Party politician. You stood for the post of Lord Speaker in the House of Lords. You have been chairman of the Labour Party from 1986 to 1992. You're a professor emeritus of the LSE and a prolific writer. It's great to be with you on this chat. We've had a very interesting day today with a diverse set of speakers. One that started with plenary addresses by Professor Abhijit Banerjee and Professor Arvind Panagraya, as you know, who shared a broad range of viewpoints between them on poverty and growth. We've had CEOs of multinational talk about the market's role in economies and in spreading prosperity. We've had the principal scientific advisor talk about R&D and the role of innovation in growth and in reducing poverty. And finally, we've had nonprofits talk about the needs of the grassroots level. So this is really a great time to round it off with you who's had a career spanning academics, economics, and of course, writing. So maybe I'll start with what perhaps is the need of the hour, which is the fact that COVID has cost not only a lot of lives, but the fact that it's caused huge demand and supply shocks. And there's no doubt that GDP has gone down and perhaps poverty has also increased. In this scenario, I've read that you've spoken about reflation, and I'd just like to hear more about what you think needs to be done to reignite growth and to see that poverty doesn't just go up exponentially in this period.
Okay, thank you. Let me start with a factual correction. Everybody who introduces me says, I was chairman of the Labour Party from 1986 to 1992. I was not. Chairman of the Labour Party is only for 1 year. I was chairman of my local constituency Labour Party.
My apologies.
No. They just read Google. That's all they do. Google has made us all very lazy. Let me say this. COVID has been a completely unanticipated and unanticipable shock. Unlike what happened in 2008, it did not arise from misbehavior on stock markets, banks making bad investments, or governments running, none of those. So in a sense, it's a pure, what do you call a black swan, a pure black swan, which is something which has completely surprised us. And what it has done is it has made us realize for the first time that economic life, apart from all the thing about maximizing and all that, economic life is a contact sport. Although we talk in terms of individual maximizing and firms maximizing, unless people physically get together, the economy can't operate. We never thought about the economy that way. We only thought we were going to buy and selling, demand and supply, investment, consumption. But the fact that consumption cannot just be done by me, there's no fun. I want to consume with somebody. I want to buy something from somebody else, and I very often want to buy it in person. The big thing which happened with coronavirus, unlike earthquakes or anything like that, the contact became impossible. We had never thought about that. Physical contact was impossible. So at that time, what we could do? Well, we decided, economies across the world decided, that balanced budgets and deficits and all those are completely irrelevant. The task of an economy was to sustain as much life as possible, regardless of debts or anything like that. So you can borrow as much as you like. In this emergency, it's like an earthquake. In this emergency, you don't wait, you just borrow as much as you like and make quite sure that this flow of contact can be renewed. Now, it's very difficult. We are having a discussion in the UK, can pubs reopen? How can pubs reopen? Because pubs are close contact. So we have distance. And so it has challenged us. And 25% drop in GDP has never been seen before, not even during the Great Depression. So suddenly, within 3 months, within 4 months. So we are learning that economy, as I said, economy is like kabaddi or like rugby. It is not like cricket or tennis. Tennis can be played at a distance, but kabaddi has to be played. And so production and consumption in economics has to be a joint activity. And as soon as we can make that possible again, life will come to normal. In the meantime, break all rules.
So are you advocating, therefore, that both on the fiscal side and the monetary side, you should be as liberal as possible?
It is not just me advocating it. Across the financial and intergovernmental authorities,
right?
Everybody has said, IMF has said it, the US has practiced it, UK has practiced it. UK, which was very fiscally conservative, has now borrowed money like there's no tomorrow.
Right.
Why? Because ultimately, you have to save lives. you have to save, you have to save jobs, you have to save the economy.
Right.
It's no good just saving money.
Yeah.
Money is a means. It's not an end. But even before COVID happened, some of us, myself included, were saying, don't worry about the debt GDP ratio. Think of how much it costs to service the debt as a proportion of GDP. Right now, interest rates are very low. Globally, interest rates are very low. They're negative
in real terms. Yeah.
Borrow. You
Yeah.
can borrow like there's no tomorrow, and
Yeah.
that will revive the economy. Right now, it will feed the economy while it can't work.
Right.
And when the economy can work, we will get the money back.
Yeah, yeah. So if you adopt a stance of saying this is the time to save the economy and borrow as if there's no tomorrow and don't worry since interest rates are low, where would you advocate that this money be spent? In what kind of activities? Do you spend it to save firms? Do you spend it to save individuals? And as many countries have done, say 80% of salaries are protected. And in a country like India, where most jobs are informal, what do you really do?
Well, I have been writing about this, that basically just as we have Manrega in the rural areas, which says 100 days work guaranteed, one member of the family and so on. What we should have done is for urban informal sector workers, they should have 100 days guaranteed unemployment benefit.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Those people didn't have to go from Delhi to Uttar Pradesh.
Yeah.
If they had a cushion of money, let's say for 100 days, or you could extend it to 200 days.
Right.
Where they are,
Yeah.
because roughly 200 million informal sector workers were left destitute. And we have wasted a lot of their time. We have spread coronavirus in the rural areas. And in a sense, in what was called a planned economy and all that, there's no preparation for a large chunk of workers who are the most needy.
Right.
So I would say that we should think. And another thing I would say, and I have advocated in the past, I would like all women, I would like a basic income, but only for women.
Right.
A universal basic income for all adult women. Because women do a lot of unpaid work.
Right.
They just do unpaid work routinely. We have one of the lowest labor force participation rate of women in all of Asia. And there are a lot of women doing work but not getting paid. Do those two things and you will have a solid welfare state.
Yeah, yeah. You've, the government has done something like that on the women's side by having some money paid to SHG women every month. So I think to some extent that's happened. So what you're talking about is the immediate need. How do you see it on a slightly longer term basis in terms of what you've written maybe 10, 15 years back about the need for India to say that the only way to address poverty is to get people out of rural areas into into manufacturing and to cities. So how do you see that today? Maybe you said this 15 years back.
I still see that as a major failure of Indian economic policy.
Right.
That we didn't create enough jobs in organized industrial sector, the formal sector, to absorb all the rural surplus labor. So the rural surplus labor is either in rural areas, subsistence farmers and all that. 58% live in rural areas, which is a disgrace, I think. And then these urban workers who came out during the corona, whom we certainly believe became visible, they are the other victims of our bad industrialization policy. So I say, let us basically construct a welfare state. Just as I was saying, generalizing the Manrega idea that every worker who is temporary, not in a proper job, will get some sort of unemployment benefit. 100 days a year would be one way, or maybe 200 days, but they can't get it if they are in work.
Right.
And then we'll have to devise ways in which there are incentives to work rather than the rely on unemployment benefit. If we do that, it will create a very solid purchasing power in the economy, but also it will almost cure the core of poverty in India, which is going on for. See, for example, if we had decent housing for these people, they would not have had to migrate. Now we have huge infrastructure projects, and people build luxury apartments in Gurgaon and Noida. But in Delhi itself, these people had no decent housing. Now, why haven't we thought about that? For example, with 3D printing, you can build a house very quickly. Some countries have done that. So we ought to think big about a core welfare state.
Right. So let's say the elements as you've described of a core welfare state are that you protect the urban poor, just like you have Narega, and you have maybe great rental markets, low-cost rental markets in urban areas, again, to provide some sort of a floor for urban workers and even to attract them. But even beyond that, I think your point often I've read has been that the state you should have a minimalistic state beyond this, and it's more about markets creating jobs and prosperity. So how do we compete there? If you look at even today, COVID has caused huge changes in global supply chains, but perhaps most of the changes have been captured by Vietnam and other countries. So what does India need to do to capture these global supply chain shifts?
Two things have happened across the world. There's always a debate about market or the state.
Sorry?
All right. There's a debate about market or the state.
Right.
Now, COVID has said only the market, only the state can cope. But everywhere the state has failed. Across the world, the state has had to do this, and across the world, the state has failed. It's very interesting. But answer to your question is, historically, Vietnam or Korea or Japan or Taiwan, what they did, they took their businessmen in confidence with the government. The government said, you guys are good, you take risks, you export, we will help you to export more. In India, what happened from the beginning, although the business community was nationalistic, they supported the Congress and all that, as soon as becoming independent, private business was treated with suspicion. No, you can't do that, only the government can do industry. And that has not gone away. That has not gone away for all these years. Rao Singh government of 1991 opened up the economy. But even now, for example, when Narendra Modi became Prime Minister, Rahul Gandhi said, "Ye to suit boot ki sarkar hai," and he got sort of shocked by that. And so the business government cooperation doesn't exist in India. Now that is a synergy, because India has been a successful business economy for 3,000 years. I mean, and the private business has been there forever in Indian history. Export has been there. Financial markets have been there. Let us not stop them. And so I think that there's a mindset in the politicians of all parties needed in which say, listen, boys and girls, business create jobs. Business create growth. Government doesn't create growth. Government may collect money and give money, but government by and large is not efficient enough to. And for example, had we not nationalized our banks way back in 1969, banks would not be in such a pathetic situation as they are. Banks have become part of the crony capitalism because they are politicized. We have the most unhealthy banking sector, for a country which should be growing. So I think we need a mental change, and that has to come within politics by politicians. And it is not a divisive issue. It's not about secularism and Hindutva. It is basically let us grow like other countries have grown. Take advantage of our private sector because there's a lot of energy in the private sector.
Right.
For example, we never think of farmers as private sector, but farmers are private sector.
Sure.
Surely the Green Revolution was powered by farmers taking incentives on and responding.
Yeah.
We should do the same with industrial business and service sector.
In addition to, I'm just a bit scared. My headset is saying that it's on low power. So if I lose you for a minute, please excuse me. I'll go to the speaker. The percentage of different sectors now where the government is involved beyond banking is not very high. I mean, most sectors have been opened up, including other financial sectors like non-banking financial sectors, insurance, of course, manufacturing, services is pure 90, I'm sure, bulk private. So in a way, the business has moved to the private sector, right? So you talk about the mind shift change, but you also see some moves by government, like the government talks a lot and has tried to do a lot on ease of doing business, and they've got their scores up. So beyond the mindset change, are there specific policies? Are there specific bottlenecks that you think are stopping businesses from growing?
You see, basically, we have still got a labor law, in which some laws have been there for before independence.
Right.
Now, when the textile manufacturing, there used to be a constraint on, it was a multilateral fabric agreement, and that was removed. Countries like Bangladesh started having textile mills with 1,000 workers. In India, you can't have 1,000 worker factory. But so we haven't actually, you say we have allowed private sector to do business, but they are shackled. There was somebody told me 127 inspections per year for a factory. If you want to start a restaurant in Mumbai, you have 86 licenses. We haven't released the private sector at all. I think, and our non-banking financial sector is a mess, because when IL&FC collapsed, we have the banking sector credit really in a crunch because of non-performing assets. We have non-banking sector. We have a judiciary which always delays settlement of financial cases, things like that. I mean, we really do need to say, if you're going to have a vibrant economy, you've got to get seriously all these obstacles out of the way. Trust the private sector. Don't have all this bureau of this and bureau of that and checking on everybody.
Right.
And despite the IBC that this government did, which is a good idea in insolvency and bankruptcy code, we still aren't out of the woodworks, because the law tribunal has been sort of crippled by judicial delays. So we have to think comprehensively. What makes the private sector possible?
Yeah. Sorry, my headphone has a problem. I'm just going to change. So give me a minute. I'm sorry, Pooja, in case you need to come in for a minute, that's fine.
Don't worry. Yeah.
No problem.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly well.
Okay, fine. I'll just continue that. So it seems what you're saying is that we still have a lot of shackles in the private sector, whether it's labor laws or just the plethora of rules and regulations.
The shackles are in our minds.
Right.
Unlike Japan or South Korea, at independence, we made the mistake of thinking that capitalism was imperialism. It was some sort of Western invention. And we had to stop, we had to be like Russia. And that crippled us for 40 years. And even when Rao and even the BJP is very suspicious of the business sector, they suddenly start talking about, Swavalamban or this and that, get your businessmen to cooperate with the government, trust them to go and do good for the country, because if they make money, it'll be good for the country.
Yeah.
That's a psychological belief which no Indian political party has.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah. And maybe
politicians may have. But so Koreans, there's a story that Koreans came on the UN's advice to look at India and Pakistan's planning commissions in late 1950s. and they decided this is what we're not going to do. And they were poorer than us at that time, and their income now is 25 times per capita, 25 times our income.
Yeah.
This is a serious, serious issue, and in India, it's very hard to convince people. They say, no, you can't really let the private sector do this, they will steal, they'll rob, they'll do this, So other people steal and rob, not the private sector. And I don't think that is possible. I think what the COVID has shown is that the surplus labor, the surplus underemployed labor is paying the cost of our slow growth.
Right.
And until we can change that mentality, we won't move forward.
Yeah. So moving from what it takes to get the private sector going, and then change in mindset that's really required. I want to come to another topic, which is your view on poverty, which is that it's multidimensional and it's not just about a poverty line. Would you like to say a bit more about that, and where do you think government should play a bigger role in multidimensional poverty, or a smaller role and markets should take over, whichever way you think of it?
Again, historically, we never put money into health and education. Our poverty was always how many calories people can consume and how much those calories cost. It was all very foodie. The whole poverty debate was very foodie. Originally. And 15 rupees, whatever it is. And we didn't actually say, we do sort of partially here and there, like when in Bihar, Nitish Kumar started encouraging girls to go to school, give a bicycle to family. So things like that are immensely powerful in reducing poverty, or health initiatives. So health and education, unless you give that, and I'm sure when you started today, Abhijit Banerjee would have told you that poverty is a multidimensional thing, and because it is not about eating today, it is about how you're going to chart your future. You have to give not only people food for today, but they will do something better tomorrow. And there, health and education, the capability, as Amartya Sen has said, the capabilities people have to be developed. And for that, you have to have not just giving them money, but giving them facilities to be able to do things which will give them the ability to have a better tomorrow.
Right. Yeah. I think that there is some good news. I'm not saying that there's enough being spent on health, but the fact that the government over the last couple of years has started the insurance scheme for the poor, and also started to.
I think in his first term, Narendra Modi did a lot on health.
Right.
And his Ayushman stuff is very good. Ayushman Bharat is very good. And I think, but see, again and again, the problem is that things get diverted. The amazing thing, in my view, done in Modi 1 has been sort of delayed or diverted, or something has happened and it is not kept up that pace. And I think we need to finish that, when you finish that welfare state, health, education, and sort of nutrition. Or, for example, we have too many farmers. 2/3 of our farmers are subsistence farmers. Get them out and give them industrial jobs. Rural industrialization would be very good. We need rural industrialization, and that would really relieve our rural areas for surplus labor. I know you can't hear me, but don't worry. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes. You're absolutely clear. So I think it's probably
good. So I think rural industrialization, as I would say, is another need which blends with what I'm saying about surplus labor, because our farmers, 2/3 of farmers are subsistence farmers with holdings of less than an acre. And it's not viable. We got to get them out of farming. Not be so sentimental about this, Kisan and all that. We just get on with it. Allowing them to stay in farming is harmful to them. That's why you need debt cancellation. You know, if I am an ordinary worker in an urban area, they won't forgive my debt. But if I'm a farmer, they'll forgive my debt. And where is the justice in that?
Right.
You know, so I think we have to think unsentimentally and think in terms of not categories, sort of label categories. Basically, how tomorrow the children and the children's children are going to be better off. We have wasted too much time of the last 74 years. We've got to get on with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, some changes are, maybe the markets have taken care to some extent, in the sense that more than half the income, even in rural India, is non-farm income by now. So, I think,
But that is compulsory. Because from their land, they cannot get enough income to be able to sustain themselves. So, I mean, I did the NABARD report of a while ago, which shows that. But let them have better jobs off the farm, within where they live. Rural industrialization.
Yeah. I'm going to now again change topics, which is we've got a few questions from the audience. So I'm just going to read some of them out to get your thoughts on them. So the one of the questions says that India has a problem of too many welfare schemes poorly implemented. If you were to prioritize, which welfare programs would you get the government machinery to run behind?
I think one of the great difficulties is politically to take away benefits people have. Especially because our benefits are caste-based. Our whole affirmative program, because of Mandal, has gone so completely meshed in with the social structure and the backwardness of the social structure. Caste has been valorized by Mandal. So if I construct a welfare, Mohan Bhagwat has said this, and he got attacked for this. Mohan Bhagwat, head of RSS, said, before the last Bihar election, why can't we get rid of all this, caste-based allocation? And people say, you see, he wants to deprive the Dalits of what we pay. And the BJP, I think we'll have to do it gently. We will have to do it while not abolishing, but letting the existing caste-based things erode slowly. But the original thing is that I said, informal sector workers in urban areas, workers in the rural areas, and women. Those are three priority sort of groups that I would say construct a welfare state around them. And of course, children schooling and so on. And be ruthless about that. We're too much hung up about government jobs and admissions to universities and so on. That is kind of middle class kind of concerns. And while you need affirmative action, we have done enough of that. We really need to pay attention to what COVID exposed, the huge weakness of the economy, that the urban informal sector is basically helpless, left kind of supportless. And I think the sight of those people walking on public roads, it was very indicting of where we had gone wrong.
Yeah. The next question is, and I think you've partly answered it. Most Indians work at bare minimum wages, which isn't enough to lead a fulfilled life. If we don't create enough good jobs in time, we are looking at an entire generation of youth that may go underemployed. How does India go from here to create good formal jobs with social security?
Now, basically, again and again, when we create jobs, we put on developed country side conditions, permanence, social security and so on. Let's create jobs.
Yeah.
I would say when we come back from COVID, when those informal sector people come back, let's employ part of them all the time to house construction.
Sorry, to what?
Massive house construction for them.
Right. Yeah.
In urban areas. So next time they don't have to go back.
Yeah.
Something like that. With a lot of surplus labor, we can have that. And, something like Dharavi is a scandal. People have romanticized Dharavi, but Dharavi is a complete scandal, and the COVID has shown what a scandal Dharavi is. And unless, how can Mumbai be a great city, and all that, while Dharavi exists? So we got to, first of all, get rid of Dharavi and improve things over there so that we can have decent, healthy housing conditions. I've lived in Bombay, and so even in well-built houses in Charles, in Bombay, health conditions are terrible. The toilets are terrible, and things like that, and the disease spreading things. We have to take seriously those health conditions.
Yeah. Despite, I also live in Bombay, despite the housing challenges in Dharavi in terms of maybe sanitation, the houses by and large there are pakka, and the amount of manufacturing and industry that's there is pretty amazing.
Oh, no, that's all true. But see, what really happens is that there are health hazards.
Yeah.
There are health hazards, and it's a low-lying land. Well, I've been there. There's low-lying land.
Yeah.
And it is marshy land. And when it rains in Mumbai, despite the biggest, richest municipal corporation, it floods every monsoon.
Sure. Yeah. The last question. Yeah. The last question that I have from the participants is, on the one hand, we say labor laws in India are restrictive and don't allow businesses to go. However, we also have a situation where workers don't have sufficient social security, while governments are looking to suspend labor laws in favor of growth. Will we have to compromise social security for growth? Is there an alternative path? So as you know, in this last few months, many states have relaxed the labor laws.
Now, the thing is that we have lot of labor laws and security for people employed in the formal sector, right? I mean, this is basically formal industrial sector and the government sector. There is a lot of, if you people, PhDs apply for class 4 government jobs, because once you're there, you can't be sacked. I mean, there's no other job security like a government job security. So, basically, there's an island of secure jobs created. And that island is politically very powerful and is preventing that condition from spreading elsewhere. I know it is really remarkable that we always hear, but what about security? What about healthy income growth of the industrial worker? And many of them year after year. So for security of a small proportion of people, we have kept a lot of other people in insecure and underemployed jobs. That is not being seen. People see socialism as protecting public sector jobs or formal sector jobs. Even I argue with trade unionists in India that if they let these labor laws go, there'll be more union members. Union membership would be fantastically larger. They would become more powerful. But our manufacturing sector has been stuck at a small proportion of total GDP. Service sector is the largest. Why? Because government doesn't regulate service sector.
Yeah.
Why is our IT sector large? Because the Planning Commission never thought it was important. So they never regulated it. So it grew.
Yeah. So I think we are running out of time. So I think I'll close and just try to summarize your thoughts, which
My thought is,
go ahead.
Let India become an Asian country.
Yeah. Yes, the Asian.
Look at Asia. Look at Asia. Learn from Asia. Asia has a lot to teach us.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Learn
So
from
just
Asia and prosper.
Right. Yeah. So one of the few speakers I've interacted with who has a clear sense on both what the government needs to do to create a welfare state, from having the rural poor have some social security, maybe Narega, as you said, to having the urban sector also get 100 days work, and finally women. But couple that with freeing the energies of the private sector, changing mindsets so that the private sector can grow. And one way to do that and to unshackle that is really to see that they are not shackled through labor laws and other means and rules. And if we can do that, India can bloom. I think that's what I'm learning from you.
I think denationalize the political system.
Right. Thank you so much, Lord Desai. It's been a great pleasure talking to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye. Okay. Sid,
Thanks a lot for, yeah,
happy
thanks a
15th
lot.
of August.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Take
Thanks
care.
a lot. Thanks a lot,
Yeah.
Lord Desai. And thanks, Alkesh, for joining us for the Nudge Forum. Very interesting takeaways from this session as well. One of the biggest takeaways for me was that we wasted 74 years, and I think we should get on with work right now. And the second, yeah, and the second one is how do we learn to become an Asian country?
Okay.
Yeah, so thanks a lot, sir, for joining us.
Thank you very
Thanks for
much.
the,
You're very welcome.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. Take care. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Yes.
All right. Moving on. What a wonderful, meaningful, impactful day this has been. We are now nearing the end of our 24 hours. It is 11 p.m., almost 11 p.m. here in India, 24 hours that brought together thousands of people from all around the world on this Independence Day. We've witnessed some truly delightful, yet insightful and critical conversations, ranging from discussions around actions on global poverty, gender, energy, role of institutions, philanthropy, sustainability, inclusive growth, and stories from people doing tremendous work on the ground. And truly signifying that we're all in this together. We've had speakers and attendees join from every continent in the world. This has truly been the Nudge Forum Global Edition. Now, for the closing address, it is my honor and privilege to welcome the Consul General of India to Brazil, Mr. Amit Kumar Mishra, joining us all the way from Sao Paulo, Brazil, and Mr. Arun Seth, former chairman, British Telecom, chairman of NASCOM Foundation and board member of the Nudge Foundation. Mr. Seth is also a co-chair for Sustainable Development Council and is on the board of Narayana Health, SIFI, among others. It is a pleasure to have you here with us. Request you to take over, Arun sir.
Pooja, thanks.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Pooja. Dear friends from all over the world, greetings on our 74th Independence Day. I heard the PM very proudly today morning from the ramparts of Red Fort, today morning, that even a child is expected to be independent at when he or she is in the 20s. And we are nearly 75, as he said. So let's take that to heart because we have done so much for the rich and the middle class, but we need to do something more for the bottom of the pyramid at speed and scale. We are still way behind on all the deliverables of the MDG, the Millennium Development Goals. We simply need to scale with speed the social development for the underprivileged. That's the crux and the simple message that we should take out of this whole long day. As to let's stop talking and start doing is the key for us. We had done at Nudge Foundation, we had done Charcha 2020 in May, which was a and this is now a 24-hour global event, which was the next natural step. In Charcha, we had the largest convening of the social sector with 580 speakers, 20,000 live attendees, and over 300,000 total unique views for that one. I'm pleased to announce that in this 24 hours, it's actually 23 hours right now, the Nudge Forum, we've had 91 speakers, and we had more than 300K viewers from across 50 countries and still counting. That's a wow, is all I can say. So thank you everybody for, for this tremendous response. Today's sessions, we've had the best of minds, starting with Abhijit Banerjee, our latest Nobel laureate. We had Arvind Panagria, Dr. Swaminathan, Don Gibbs, Rajiv Shah, Amitabh Kant, our dynamic CEO of Niti Aayog. We had Vani Kola, Mrs. Rajshri Birla herself came on, global philanthropists like Vinod Khosla and Desh Deshpande, civil society leaders like Madhav Chauhan and Kennedy Odibe, medical folks like Dr. Indu Bhushan, Dr. Devi Shetty, education experts who wrote the current policy. Dr. Kasturi Rangan was there, Ashish Dhawan, and our very own principal scientific advisor, Dr. Vijay Raghavan was there, moderated by Nivruti Rai, speaking on each of the elements of social development and upliftment, as it's about orchestrating all these elements rather than individual elements. That's the key in this one. Each one is not enough, each one is necessary, but the sufficiency comes if we get most of them right at the same time. And we need to get them to the most needy. And I can't thank Ricky Cage and Mary Miliband for their inspiring anthems, giving the 74th Independence Day celebrations a big boost. Thank you. A few of the takeaways that I have from this 24 hours is we should stop working in silos. Just simply stop working in silos is the key message. And things like the, convening like the Nudge Forum is a good step in that right direction. Government, corporates, and civil societies, NGOs, need to be aligned and work together. One of the benefits that COVID, about the only benefit I can think that COVID has had, that it has forced all the various stakeholders to work together. My point is, why do we need a crisis to make work together? When the crisis is over, let's continue working together. Why do we need a crisis? And there are models that work well for the upliftment. So let's use and build on the best models from around the world, be they be from Bangladesh, be they from Peru, or as Amita, Consul General, will tell us, be they from Brazil, wherever they are, let's use the best out there and share what we do best. There is a need for institution building and investment in scientific and technological advancement. Technology needs to be at the heart of this, and it needs to be appropriate technology, not just technology for the sake of technology. The work, and one of the big outcomes, and one of the big things that I heard today was that the outcome needs to be measured carefully with data. So it should be data-driven rather than guesswork. And if we can do that, we can realign our resources in the best and most appropriate way. Civil society needs to be a strong collective. It's too fragmented now. And one of the best words I heard my good friend Ingrid tell was, it's either coexistence or no existence, which is very, very appropriate. And the digital divide is the new divide, aggravating the economic divide. So we have to work towards all this. I'm really pleased that the Nudge Foundation, in partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation and Skoll Foundation, was able to create the Nudge Forum as a global platform for civil society working together to help us get our voices together, to do our bit for the unprecedented pandemic and the havoc it's caused to the underprivileged, and possibly set us back by years. We just have to work harder together to come back to where we were and scale up quickly. So that was a summary, and now let's come to the most interesting part of the closing session, a session that connects two opposite parts of the world, Brazil and India. It's a fitting end to a 24-hour event that started with the USA and India, now the Southern Hemisphere and Brazil and India. It's a very appropriate ending. It's my privilege to introduce our next and last speaker of the 24-hour event, Mr. Amit Kumar Mishra, who's our Consul General in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Mr. Mishra is a career diplomat belonging to the IFS. He's worked at Consul General in Perth before he took charge as Consul General in Sao Paulo in 2019. In a career spanning 1.5 decades, he's served in Indian diplomatic missions in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, and Australia. He has dealt with political, commercial, education, cultural, and diaspora issues. He has also worked in the Ministry of External Affairs. Mr. Mishra has done his postgraduate in history, in botany, I'm so sorry. He knows Hindi, English, and Arabic. He's married to Mrs. Meenakshi, and they have one daughter who's there with them. So just before I start, Amit, welcome on board, first of all. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
So before I start, let me give a quick thing about my personal involvement with Brazil. We were privileged 2 years ago that we welcomed a Brazilian daughter-in-law into our family with a wedding in Portugal. And I'm pleased to say that my Samdhis, my in-laws actually live in Sao Paulo, though we've never been there. And So it's very, very appropriate that we have you sitting there and me sitting here. I should have been actually sitting in Sao Paulo also with you. So, just now, our in-laws, their name is Dora and Theo Barbero, and they live in Sao Paulo, and Dora celebrated her 70th birthday just last week. And guess what? In a Zoom call lasting 5 hours. I think that's a record we need to beat. And one more thing which I would say before we get into the meat of the whole discussion is that when we celebrated the wedding in Portugal, we had 100 people from Sao Paulo, and we had 100 people from USA and India. And we practiced our Bhangra and our Indian dances, everything. And guess what? Our new Brazilian family beat the pants of us in Bhangra. So we have you there, Amit, so we need to do something together about this. So let's get into the discussion that we are going to have. So I know that I have shown you my unashamed bias for Brazil, but would love you to comment on the similarities that you find between the people of India and Brazil. And certainly touch on because I can certainly vouch for the family values that both have. So we'd love to have you start on that, and then we'll get down to other issues. So how do you're there, you've seen the people at such close quarters.
Well, thanks, Arun, and thanks again to the Nudge Forum for this opportunity to represent here Brazil and bring the perspective from Brazil and Latin America and contribute to the debate. Well, first thing is that, we should not presume, like you mentioned, we presume we are good at Bhangra, but being defeated here, there are people who can learn quickly and beat us at that. So as you mentioned that, learning from, knowing about what exists in other parts of the world, and probably if we can replicate those models, successful models to resolve our own problems, that would be the first thing. Now coming here, I would admit that in first year of my posting here and assignment, it has been a learning experience, both in terms of the scale of economy and what Brazil has achieved as a country. A sense of admiration with, it has a substantial population, but still maybe 1/5 or 1/6 of India's population. But the scale of economy is almost $2 trillion for a 200 million base population. So that there are lessons there and there for us also. They have significantly transformed their agricultural economy. And when you read about it, then you realize that just 15 years back, Brazil was a net importer of food, and the agricultural sector was not in right shape. But today is the second largest food exporter by volume, and the sector is literally driving the economy during the COVID. And that the agricultural sector has been our key challenge in economy, as well as the number of people that the sector simply employs. And besides that, if you look at a city like Sao Paulo and a city like Mumbai, the challenges are literally similar. You have an elite area, but on the streets, transportation, poverty, sanitation, all these challenges are literally similar. I find any solution that would work for an Indian city should ideally work for a Brazilian city, and vice versa. And personally, I feel that there is a lot of for the in terms of in sync with what we are doing in terms of focus in India, we have a lot of possibility of startups cooperating between the two sides. In India, Startup India program has been hugely successful. We can proudly claim to have the third largest ecosystem in the world, second in terms of tech startups. Similarly, Sao Paulo also, before coming here, I didn't realize Sao Paulo is home to 12 unicorns. So now that's a big achievement for a city. And ideally, they are in different sectors than what our companies are. And I would give you two quick examples of how Indian companies have come here and quickly succeeded. Oyo entered this market after I came to Sao Paulo. And today, Oyo is already third or fourth largest hotel chain in Brazil. Just a matter of 8 months. So, that just for me is an eye opener of the possibility. UPL came to this market through acquisition almost a decade back. UPL Brazil today is bigger than UPL operation in India or US or any other market. Sterlite came into this market, and Sterlite has been in energy transmission. They have won 70% of bids they have participated. Aditya Birla has made acquisitions and is doing really well. So here, Indian companies have been hugely successful. And in the process, I would say that creating a name for Indian community and the brand of business here. So the commercial possibilities are there, but as with the focus of what the forum's focus on socio-economic challenges, that's also a part where, even how the governments have responded to COVID, there's such a strong similarity. In India, government is providing free ration to almost 800 million people. There is cash support to families. There is cash support to farmers. Similar thing is happening in Brazil. And guess what? It's a matter of satisfaction that our mechanism of delivery is more efficient and more prompt than what I have seen here in Brazilian counterparts. And there is interest in Brazilian system and learning about it, what our direct benefit transfer has been able to achieve. And obviously they are taken up by the scale of it. So, as Indian representative here, I see a lot of similarities, and more than similarities, I would say lots of possibilities. So our focus here is to just enrich our own knowledge, pass it on to the system, to the people who understand it, look at what complementarities we can find, and then move from there.
Thank you very much, Amit, for that. But since we are talking in terms of the social angle, which is where we need to find partnerships, I understand that the universal basic income has been implemented in Brazil.
Well, yes,
or some form
in some
of
form.
that. And are there any learnings for our country? Because I'm sure our government is looking at all the models in order to help our own people.
No, definitely. If you speak to a common Brazilian, it doesn't matter which segment of society he belongs to. The program Bolsa Familia, where a cash handout was given to the family, and then there are similar supporting mechanisms where, if the child should not work, the child is going to school and everything, there are conditions attached to that. But that program is credited to bring almost 70 million people out of poverty in this country. So that's no mean achievement for a society, And obviously in India also, we are at a very starting stages. It has been implemented in farming sector, where we are providing a nominal support to our farmers through Pradhan Mantri Kisan Yojana, Kisan Samman Yojana. I'm sure that there are lessons to learn, and it's not that we are not, this conversation is not happening. I had the pleasure to meet Mr. Suplicy, who is based in Sao Paulo only, who started this idea of universal basic income, and is a very strong proponent of its implementation across countries. It doesn't matter. I had a discussion with him in developed, undeveloped, developing, doesn't matter. He's a firm believer on that. And civil society basis, he was in India, in Hyderabad in last October. So these conversations are happening, and I believe Niti Aayog representatives participated in that conference. It's just that these things take time to percolate in system. And in India, if anything we implement, just because of the sheer number of our people or beneficiaries, the financial burden on governments is going to be very high. So they are looking at the best practices across the world, and they will adapt what goes well for the Indian system and what we can afford. That's obviously a rider.
Wonderful. Tell me, what is the size of the Indian diaspora in, let's say, in Brazil and then all of South America? Because I think there are also lots of in Argentina and all over.
Well, I'm sorry, I won't be able to comment on the overall size in Latin America, but I do understand it's less. I am coming from Australia, where Perth only had 100,000 Indian origin people, but you won't find 100,000 in whole of Latin America. But okay. Brazil, it's a small population, maybe 5,000 to 7,000, more on 5,000 side if you say. But what has been a revelation for me is that the impact this small community brings in terms of relationship, and also impact of that community in Brazil, that has been quite humongous. I have come across where institutions have been set up literally, and I mean literally by Indians. You have, you take Brazilian space program, there is an Indian scientist, Mr. Savant, who has, set up a unique, array of telescopes that looks at solar flares, and that data is valued across the world in the space research community. You have a gentleman based in Rio, Mr. Hamza, who is a geologist. He has discovered a river below Amazon. It's named after him, Hamza River.
Wow.
You have another gentleman who works on the material science and radiology. Similarly, these people have helped created institutions. Something I would say is a counterpart of what we have under the DRDO framework, certain institutions where we can credit individuals with. And similar impact, I would say, unlike many other countries here, IT and pharma, we have very strong presence. Our top 5-6 companies of IT are present here doing good business. Similarly, on pharma, more than 24 companies would be present here. But what is, one should understand is that being here requires a lot of commitment. So the people who have are heading these institutions here, these private companies, they're set up here and operations here, they have to commit to the language and commit to the culture, and they require a long-term presence here. All of them, some of them have been around for now 2 decades. So you can say that their company's journey has started with them and is continuing with them. It's not about a large turnover as you see it in other parts of the world for this company. So I personally would like to credit these people for their perseverance. And Brazil requires, if you want to succeed in business, it requires a lot of patience here. It's not easy, but these people have persisted with their family.
You can say the same about India. When foreigners come to India, they also require a lot of patience.
I can tell you with the experience, and my Brazilian friends agree, it beats India with a margin, huge margin.
Okay, so at least we're better than Bhangra on that.
And third part, which I want to quickly highlight, individual efforts. Again, you have here as part of Carnival, a huge festival called Bloco Bollywood.
Yeah.
So it's good to see thousands of people, and say more Brazilians than Indians.
Okay.
Dancing to, maybe they're doing their Bhangra practice there, and that's why they've taken you by surprise.
But tell me what I mean, like, I'll take you up on the startup side, because that's an area that I personally work in addition to, of course, the social sector. And we'd love to find ways to collaborate between our NGOs. I mean, because normally you talk of business, but have we ever thought of collaborating between our NGOs? At Nudge, we'd love to see whether there's something we could do and learn.
We definitely would facilitate any kind of connection. One thing I would say that this is a relationship where governments have taken the lead. I have come, there are other way around places around. In Australia, I often felt as Consul General that the people-to-people ties were ahead, and the government was following it. Here, governments have taken the lead. You have seen a very huge successful visit of Brazilian president to India in January. But the other part of relationship, if you look at bilateral trade, I would forego the investment part. That way, Indian companies' presence is doing well. But bilateral trade is lagging behind. Now, people-to-people contacts are there, but as you mentioned, there are many more stakeholders in any relationship. NGOs, civil societies, people who are in academia and other things, and those relationships and bonds, when created, they don't need to be nurtured on a regular basis. There are people on both sides who, if find common ground, they continue that conversation and engagement independent of governments. So what we would want to do is we would want to definitely facilitate these connections. I'm more than happy to carry on this conversation with you and help it connect, because the challenges that we have by the sheer scale of the numbers, it's not possible for any government, as Prime Minister mentioned, it's for each individual to contribute. Each individual, and it's, I would say rather, for each Indian at this end also, and in India also. I would look forward to your visit here to Sao Paulo.
No, we had actually planned to be there in November, but sadly the pandemic came in the way.
No, let's hope pandemic shouldn't go. It came with 2020, and I'm praying it goes with 2020. 2021 early culture planet trip here. We will connect. We'll help you connect with the people who understand that NGO and civil society ecosystem also better. That would also be a learning experience for us also. I think I would admit that as consulate, we have not engaged or touched on those, those parts of a relationship. We are also caught up with what it involves in terms of government, science and technology, commerce, people to people, culture. So civil society part we have not touched yet. I would be happy to facilitate those connections.
Even on the medical side, even because today a lot of discussion was around health delivery, and I sit on the board of of Narayan Health, which is one of the leading hospitals which works on affordable healthcare. We actually have a hospital in Cayman Islands, and we'd love to explore. I don't know whether this is the timing is not right, but there's a lot of exchange on the medical technology and processes which we can facilitate rather than just pharma.
Sure. One thing that I have learned after coming to Brazil is that Brazil is home to probably among the best public funded health systems.
Wow.
Its outreach is outstanding. You have to see the local units to believe it. But they are challenged by the scale of geography, but they have not let it affect the quality of the service. That's something really, really admirable that you have seen here.
And maybe that's something you could help to facilitate with, Ministry of Health and Indu Bhushan of Ayushman Bharat.
Sure. In that field, I would say we would have a learning experience from what they have been able to achieve. That's just a commitment, that serious amount of spending that government does, and to maintain this quality. In terms of opening up to stakeholders from outside, hospitals and others, that's where in general I felt that Brazil has a long history of being a closed economy, and the sectoral sectoral associations are the one which rule the roost, in help in the rule setting of the rules with governments and the individual players also. And they are a bit slow to open up, but that said, if you engage them, they are happy to, and they're happy to engage and explore options. And thankfully, this year we have seen a lot of interest in engaging India, which has been strengthened after COVID. And the Brazilians have seen how COVID has ensured one thing. The one takeaway for everyone is that you have to diversify your engagement in terms of countries, companies, sectors, and that you have to do it beyond continent. Otherwise, for Brazil, the Europe and the North America has always taken priority. They were slowly opening up to China, but at this moment you have seen a lot of interest with
wonderful
with India also. We didn't have governors' offices reaching out to consulates on their own. So that's one big change I'm seeing, and I'm sure that it will help us also, because there's equal desire from the government systems on both sides to facilitate. We just have to put the right people in the room and leave them they will find in the conversations, they will find a common ground and find productive endeavors to indulge in.
Perfect, Amit. It's been really wonderful. So thank you so much for the time you've taken. I know it's only midday there, and it's getting to be midnight here. It's a very long 24 hours for our team. So I really thank you, and we'll continue this conversation beyond this talk on so many other issues. I'll make sure of that. So thank you.
Sure, thank you, Arun. Thanks everyone. Thanks Pooja and Amit for giving the opportunity. And it's really good to be part of it and represent here Latin America, and bring the continent to the fore. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. I'm just now going to just say a little thanks to everybody who's all our speakers. As I told you, we had more than 90 speakers today across many countries, many time zones. I want to thank our partners, Rockefeller and Skoll Foundations, who've taken so much time, and including the CEOs participated in this. And of course, I'd like to thank our dedicated and enthusiastic Nudge team. There's just too many people to thank at this point. And led by our dynamic CEO, Atul Sutija, and who's worked tirelessly to make this event a grand success. I think it's been a great effort, and I can promise on behalf of the Nudge board that we will be making all the efforts to build on all the ideas that have been given to us, including creating a whole convening platform which could help the sector to come together and work as one. And with civil society, and that's the main issue has been to, our main issue will be how do we give benefits to the lowest strata of our society who deserve it with the least amount of friction. That's going to be our effort to work at scale and to deliver on the promise of this whole 24 hours today. So good night and Jai Hind.
Thanks a lot, Arun sir, and thanks a lot, Consul General Amit Kumar Mishra, for joining